You hear the knock as a soft, polite thud against wood that has known many fists, many rains, and many hurried arrivals. And you know, even before you rise, that the house has only one real bed, and more than one real body. The hearth is low and orange, a brazier of comfort that makes its own little nation of warmth in a room wider than your purse and smaller than your hopes. You breathe the gentle smoke, you blink the rushlights sting from your eyes, and you feel your own blanket tug at your knees, as if it would like you to pretend sleep and let someone else greet the guest. You do not. Courtesy lives here, and you live with it. The latch lifts with a familiar scrape. The door opens on a shoulder-wide crack and a slice of wet night, and your visitor steps inside with that shorebird shuffle of a person who has walked more road than he wished. He says good evening the way a man says bread. His cloak drips, his hat brim glitters with small beads, and he smells of rain flattening dust, of horse sweat that has cooled too quickly, and of cider breath made shy by wind. You greet him, not too brightly, because it is late, and anyone who is too cheerful at this hour is probably hiding a stone in the loaf. He shows his hands to the fire like a man opening his heart, and lets a slow sigh slip out into the rafters. There is the ordinary exchange you can speak in your sleep, where he came from, where he hopes to end up, who in your lane might know his name. You have heard this road story told a dozen ways by a dozen mouths, and each time it wears a different cap but walks with the same feet. He is no thief. He has the heavy awkwardness of honest travel and the gratitude of someone allowed to stop. He looks at the bench, looks at the chest, looks at the corner by the door where the dog curls like a question mark, and then looks at the bed. Of course he does. That is the great landmark of the house, the piece of furniture that holds more of your life than any plank, pot, or stool ever could. You tell him he is welcome. The word sits warm in the room, a small loaf broken in two. You also tell him, because this is truth and not trap, that the bed must be shared. He nods in the steady way of a man who has shared worse. A damp loft, a church porch, the underside of a cart with stars peeking through the spokes. You think of the straw tick that remembers your shape like a gossip, of the wool blanket that pulls toward any heat as if it owes no allegiance to the person beneath it, and of the long bolster that pretends it can keep borders where borders do not survive. You think of elbows and knees, of the polite choreography of turning backs, and of the sigh that proves you are both pretending not to snore. You bank the embers with a spoon of ash and nudge the last sticks closer, because fire has its own manners and should not be left hungry. The rushlight guttering in the iron clip makes a little lake of brightness on the table and throws long saints of shadow across the wall. You fetch the basin and set it down with an apologetic clink. He shakes his head. You know that particular pride. Better to keep the day's dust on the feet than wake the bones with cold water and make them complain. You fold your night chemise across your arm, smooth the single linen sheet with your knuckles, and feel, with the dull wisdom of habit, the faint chill that lingers no matter how often it is aired. He loosens his belt and rolls his cloak with the cautious reverence of a man whose garment is also his shelter. You tug at the bed's corner to show which side is yours, not because you are fussy though you are a little, but because your hand knows the good edge where the rope lattice still holds, and the sack does not sag so dangerously toward the floor. He smiles, the kind that shows no teeth, and asks for no more talk. You nod as if you have just concluded a bargain at market, though the price you have paid is counted in inches, not coins. You blow the rushlight to a cherry and listen to the room complete itself. The old boards shift as if the house stretches after a long day. The dog, who believes hospitality is a blanket with four paws, thumps once with his tail and settles back into his circle. Outside, wind brushes the wall like a broom made of night. You both ease under the wool, at the practiced speed of people who have no wish to let the cold share the bed, and for a moment the blanket holds its line as if it were a good trained thing. There is always a small negotiation of breath. You turn your face toward the hearth to keep your exhale from stirring his mustache, and he turns his face toward the shutter to keep his from stirring your patience. Your knees are foreign at first, then neighborly, then simply part of the mathematics. He coughs the cough of a man with a road throat. You answer with a gentle clearing, not to copy him, but to say, in the dialect of night, that you heard and you bear it. His belt buckle knocks once against the bed frame. He swears softly, in a way that is more prayer than offense. You accept the apology that was not voiced, and you both try stillness again. Under the wool, the world becomes small and precise. You feel the roped understraps through the straw like faint lines on a palm, the kind some say can be read to foretell your morning aches. You count the heartbeats that live in your ears. You let your thoughts shuffle like slates in an abacus, tallying and untallying the day, until the numbers forget how to stand. Outside, some late traveler on the road calls to a friend or to himself. The sound comes thin, as if it has been traveling through water. Inside, the only sound is the little silver hiss of embers, and the soft, involuntary hymns of a tired man keeping watch in his sleep. A plain fact, the kind that sits quietly and does not mind the dark. In this land and century, beds are shared more often than not by kin, guests, and strangers alike because wood, wool, and room are dear, and hospitality is heavier in the hand than comfort. A small oddity, the sort of thing a grandmare might shrug at. Some households lay sprigs of wormwood or sweet gale at the mattress edge to persuade the smaller creatures of the night to mind their own business, and if the scent is a little sharp, well, so is morning. And historians still argue whether the enclosed box beds that later become a Breton pride, those wooden cupboards of sleep with doors like shutters, already shelter sleepers in your century, or arrive more commonly in the ones to come. The old timber keeps its secrets, and the surviving examples mostly belong to later years. You close your eyes to make more room inside your head. The guest adjusts once, twice, then becomes an even weight at your back, like a sack of grain that has decided to be reasonable. The blanket creeps toward him the way blankets do. You tug a measured inch back, and the wool pretends surprise. The house breathes, and so do you, and the road outside climbs the hill toward quiet. By the time the stranger's cloak stops weeping onto the floor, the embers have settled into a low-red geography that shows you every obstacle in a kinder light than daylight ever does. You squat by the hearth with the flat fire iron and pull a skin of ash over the glow, the way you might tuck a child who has already fallen asleep. A few orange eyes keep watch through the gray. You do not want brilliance now. You want a faithful seed of morning. The room obliges. Its corners soften. The smoke climbs without hurry and forgets to scratch your throat. You look at the path from door to bed and laugh under your breath, because the path, such as it is, currently runs straight across your blanket like a road that ignored the hill it was meant to avoid. It is the old problem. Too much furniture for a room that pretends to be a hall, kitchen, pantry, bedchamber, kennel, and sometimes barnside antechamber. You set the rushlight stub in the iron clip, just high enough to keep its tallow teardrop away from inquisitive moths that are somewhere. Always, even in this season. The flame shows you the coffer by the wall, a belly-heavy oak chest with iron straps and a lid that has learned to squeak like a scold, and the three-legged stool whose uneven pride tilts it toward the hearth. The trestle board leans against the wall like a tired cousin. The dog raises one eyebrow, which is the entire speech of a dog. You decide on moving the chest first. You press two hands to its cold flank, and your guest, polite enough to understand a grunt, takes the other end. You both lift an inch, then another, and the chest agrees to be carried rather than dragged. The iron hasps ring like a small bell. Your steps are short, careful, ceremonial. You set it beneath the shuttered window where the draft can lick its boards instead of your shoulders. Now the room makes a little more sense. Now a person can come from door to hearth without stepping on a sleeping person's dignity. You turn the stool sideways to face the fire. It looks, all at once, like a friend who has promised not to gossip. You slide the trestle board to knit with its legs, and it stands again, an honest table instead of a memory of one. You test the path, door latch, 2 steps past the table, around the dog who believes himself a low, warm furnishing, and then crucially, a bend that keeps a traveler's boots from choosing your blanket as a bridge. You push the bed a thumb width from the wall until the rope lattice complains in the voice of tired hemp. The tick sighs and redistributes yesterday's straw, a soft rain inside cloth. You pat it. It does not take offense. At the foot, you wedge a flat stone under the lowest leg, because the floor, like the world, prefers to be a little downhill toward the door. You gather your shoes, Set them side by side with their toes pointing out, both easy to find and, if old sayings carry weight, less likely to invite wandering dreams to try them on. The guest watches you and nods at each small change, as if approving a map. He rubs the last of the road from his hands and, without words, tucks his knife, nothing fancy, just a day knife under the chest slip, where it won't glint at the wrong hour. He has good manners. He keeps his bundle tight and his shadow smaller than it could be. He holds the rushlight while you shift the pothook one chain link higher, so the kettle won't hiss over the banked coals. Quiet work has its own blessing. Your shoulders warm from even, useful movement. Your mind empties of anything grander than angles and knuckles, which is a relief. The room's scents sort themselves into layers. Wool and salt, sweat close to the bed, tallow and wood smoke near the hearth, a distant sour, sweet from yesterday's cider, which somehow grows polite in the night. The floor gives you its catalog under bare feet, a smooth patch by the stool, a grid of ash near the fire, a nick where you once dropped the ladle and pretended you meant to. The shutter rattles once in the wind, a door that changed its mind. You use a wedge of kindling to quiet it. In this dim hour, everything accepts instruction, as long as you ask without pride. A plain, steady fact to pocket for later. All across this century and these coasts, you keep a hearth alive overnight by banking it, drawing ash over live coals, so they smolder and greet dawn without a fresh fight for flame. It saves kindling, saves breath, and saves you from the sort of morning that begins with two flints quarrel and ends with a house sulking in smoke. A smaller, stranger tidbit drifts in with the old tales. Some folk chalk a little cross on the hearthstone and another on the coffer lid before sleep. Not because chalk is stronger than fire or thieves, but because a mark can remind a house to behave, and reminding a house is half of keeping it. And historians still argue whether most Breton cottages in your 14th century favored a hearth set on the floor's center, with smoke searching the rafters for a way out, or a built hearth against the gable with a hooding of stone excavations offer patchwork answers. And village to village can be as different as cousins who share a brow but not a temper. The room settles into its improved shape, as if it had always meant to be this way. Your guest tests the path once, lifting his boots high, respectful of the floor's memory and the dog's claim. He smiles, which is cheaper than thanks and often better. You set the rushlight down to a low, steady sob of flame. Its shadow ladder climbs the beam and gets lost in the smoke black that years have painted there. The kettle murmurs to itself with no intention of boiling. The bed waits, a large compromise holding together with twine and goodwill. You check the latches, because that is what the hour expects. Door bar in its cradle, shutter pin set, chest hasp pressed flat. The spoon sits in the porridge pot like a sleeping heron. The broom leans upside down so its bristles might keep their courage until morning. You let your hand pass over the bed's bolster, coaxing it into a line that will stay straight until someone breathes. The dog hauls himself in a slow half circle and places his chin on your foot to claim a little future warmth. The guest coughs once and apologizes with his eyes. You accept. You take one last look at the path your hands made and feel the small pride that comes from arranging a narrow world so it will carry two people without complaint. You climb back beneath the wool. The rushlight kisses the ash and goes to a red thought. The new walkway holds. The room remembers. The embers breathe like a cat in a patch of sun it has invented for the night. The wind, finding fewer edges, becomes only a polite visitor at the shutter rather than a restless cousin in the middle of the house. In the darkness, your mind keeps a map of furniture and feet, and then thankfully forgets it. Sleep is always better in a room that has agreed to your terms. You know the bed's slope the way a miller knows his stones. You lift the tick's edge and let a fall of straw slide into the low corner, then lift the opposite edge to reclaim it. The motion is a kind of kneading. Your guest, seeing your rhythm, sets a palm beneath the sacking and pushes up, making a hill where you need it so your downstroke can make a plane. You nod. Between two people, a bed pretends it was designed for two. The rope lattice groans in a voice of rubbed hemp, and the straw sighs like dry grass, bowing to a passing cloud. Your guest watches from the corner with a look that means he has performed the same rite in other houses, with other lumps, under other roofs. Dust lifts, not angry, just opinionated, and hangs in the rushlight like a slow swarm of nothing. You keep your mouth closed and breathe through your nose, because you have learned the difference between smoke that tells the room a story and chaff that wants to write it in your throat. The tick's cloth is coarse linen, rubbed thin where shoulders live and thick where feet give up. Your fingers know the seams that always need calming. You slip a length of flax twine through the mouth, where a stitch gave way last week, and coax it shut with 3 quick ties. The kind of repair no one will praise, and everyone will trust. You work with quiet, even swats, pushing the straw from the old hip hollows, and knee nests toward the long, empty middle. The sound is a dry whisper, a book being turned by wind. You meet little surprises in the filling an oat whisker that pricks, a head of barley that escaped the flail, a curl of reed that somehow found its way here from last autumn's floor rushes, and you pluck them like thorns from a sleeve. Each handful you persuade from one side to the other is a small, sensible victory. The bedworld flattens by degrees, like dough coaxed into a circle that will never be perfect and doesn't need to be. The dog, who considers himself senior counsel in all household matters, thumps his tail once against the stool leg, as if to approve the engineering. When you reach the middle, your knuckles find the rope lattice again, through the tick-crossed lengths of hemp that have stretched over seasons, into a soft net. You press your palm, and hear the rope speak a little creak. The bed's way of saying it is awake and paying attention. Somewhere in the chest, the bed key, nothing more exotic than a wooden handle with a notch, waits for the next day you decide to tighten the ropes. Not tonight. Tonight you are making peace with what already holds. You bring the bolster back into line at the head, patting it as if it were a well-behaved child who will absolutely not roll into exile at the first breath. A plain, comfortable fact lies under your hands. For most folk in this century, farmers, fishers, artisans with honest backs, the paillasse is the bed. A tick of linen or hemp, stuffed with straw from the last threshing, set on a web of rope or on boards, turned, beaten, and restuffed as the year moves. The good wool mattress, feather-stuffed pillows, carved high frame, those live in houses with larger windows. Here, the ordinary miracle is clean straw and a tight lattice, and it does the work of sleep as faithfully as anything gilded. You shake the sheet, the one sheet that lies between you and the tick, and it drops in a slow, forgiving wave. Your guest catches the far edge and smooths with you, palms skimming the linen, pushing out the small hollows that would become big hollows by dawn. The sheet smells like air that remembered smoke clean enough, and that is the right measure at this hour. The blanket waits over the chair, a patient animal that will need watching later, because it has a habit of siding with the warmer person out of principle. You pull a handful of straw from the tick's mouth and test it. It crackles with that good dry crackle. It breaks clean, not damp. You think, as you always do, that the next fair day you will take the tick out to the fence rail and beat it with a flat switch until the dust flies like a blessing. You picture the yard full of small golden weather, and you yawn, because such ambition belongs to sunlight. Tonight you have enough. A small sideways tidbit strays in with the work, the sort of thing a neighbor passes on while helping peg up washing. In some seasons, when straw is scarce or simply too lively with little jumpers, folk tuck bracken fronds into the filling, a green-brown bedding with a peppery scent that swears it discourages unwelcome company. It is a stubborn plant that doesn't mind being asked to do this job, and while the smell is not every nose's friend, some houses swear by it as if it were a saint with a fern for a halo. You turn the tick one last time, a gentle roll that lands the seam against the wall, where hands won't worry it in the night. You tuck the corners as if the bed were a letter you want the morning to read without laughing. Your guest hums a sound that is not a tune but something like it, the human voice's way of smoothing work. You sit back on your heels and listen to the room measure the new shape, the kettle answering the hearth with a soft round breath, the shutter agreeing to keep its pin quiet. The stool, remembering it, is a seat and not a trap. You accept that no matter how you coax it, the straw will form ridges by dawn that follow the map of your bones. That is not failure. That is the conversation between body and bed. A few smart pats now can shift tomorrow's stiff spot from the usual place to a new one, which will feel like variety, and sometimes variety is half of comfort. You do a last sweep with your palm and find the mattress flatter, the slope gentler, the path of knees to the edge more forgiving. Historians still argue whether households like yours refreshed the straw by the great feasts All Saints, Christmas, Easter, Midsummer, or whether the rhythm was more often tied to threshing and the availability of new stocks, with some cottages turning and beating the old filling for months before granting themselves a full refill. Records love to speak about grand houses, where feathers multiply in inventories, but the humble beds mostly leave their testimony in worn ticks and a scatter of seeds found where floors were swept into middens. So the scholars make their peace with gaps and let the straw tell part of its own story. You set the sheet again, lay the blanket true, and slide your hand beneath the bolster as if to greet the pillow from behind. Satisfied, you give the pious a last, firm pat the benediction of the tired, and the bed answers with a soft, resigned hush. Your guest, reading the sign, loosens his shoulders. The dog resettles with a grunt that sounds like a good wish. You climb in and feel the new evenness welcome your weight, a quiet kindness that will last at least until the moon rolls to the chimney and the house sighs. You take the blanket from its throne on the chair back and feel the old, familiar prickle kiss your wrists. It is the kind of wool that remembers the animal, a dense, honest cloth with a faint tang of lanolin hiding beneath smoke and salt. When your fingers slide along the nap, they find a field that lies one way, then rebels if you stroke it back. You lift the weight with two hands, and the blanket settles across your forearms like a stern aunt who consented to be carried but not coddled. Your guest watches with a polite half-smile that admits he knows this part of the ceremony. The shaking out, the beating off, the small thunder of dust that pretends it is weather. You do not shake near the hearth. You learned long ago that ash is the friend of no textile. Instead, you step to the shutter, ease the pin, and open just enough to let the night sip at the room. The wind comes in on cautious feet. You fold the blanket lengthwise, grip the selvage, and give it a first gentle snap. A ghost of powder lifts and twirls in the rushlight. Not dramatic, more like a whispered opinion. You wait for it to find the door on its own. Then you shake again, harder, and the blanket answers with a low, felted drum beat in your hands. The cloth is thick, a plain weave worked by someone who understood duty. It is not the soft miracle from a great bed hung with curtains. It is the daily soldier, mended at the corner where the dog once worried it, patched along an edge where friction made a thin moon. You read its history by your fingers, a burr that argued with the carter and won, a small grease-dark stain that will never confess whether it came from stew or tallow, a knot in the weft that survived the loom and decided to live. You shake, you fold, you shake, and each time the blanket loosens some quiet of grit that belongs to road coats and chimney talk and the shared human habit of shedding wherever we lie. Your guest lifts the far edge and you find a rhythm together. 2 easy pulses, then a pause, then 2 again. The dog blinks at the breeze and resettles his muzzle behind his paws in case something edible falls from wool, which, to be fair, has happened. You take the blanket to the door and, holding it by the corners, give it a slow banner's flutter. Night air moves through, bringing with it the lane's wet earth perfume, a hint of the sea your cousin swears he can smell from here, and the quiet iron of rain waiting on the roof. The cloth breathes. You lit it. On the table sits the small willow switch you keep for this, not for scolding children, though it looks the part, but for scolding blankets. You carry the wool to the stool and stretch it across the seat, then tap, tap, tap along the seams where crumbs and small lives like to make a parish. The sound is forgiving, like fingers on a drum. You lift, refold, and give attention to the middle where knees and elbows leave their opinions. You do not beat hard. Hard beating makes a sulking cloth. You beat like a person dusting a prayer from a book. A plain, steady fact wears no feathers and needs none. For folk like you in this century, wool is the common warmth in bed blankets, coverlets, and cloaks, pulled double when nights turn mean. They are not washed each season with buckets and bars. Water and weight would ruin them quicker than cold ever could. Instead, they are aired, brushed, beaten, and given a little smoke when the fire is kind. And they serve for years, even a lifetime, going from parent to child the way a story does. The color is usually honest, undyed browns, grays, off-whites that remember sheep more than dive at, and when a dyed piece wanders into a cottage, it looks like a holiday that forgot to end. You angle the blanket toward the hearth's gentlest breath and let a wisp of wood smoke comb through it. Not enough to blacken, just enough to persuade small-legged opinions to consider another parish. Your grandmother called this giving the cloth a sermon, and the sermon's text was smoke, which moth and flea dislike more than you do. It leaves a kindly smell that matches the room. Oak and ash, a little peat on days when peat can be had. Your guest closes his eyes as if the scent is a song he once knew. He reaches to help and you share the corners again. An easy, neighborly silence between you. From the shutter, you can see the lane silvering under a cloud that remembers the moon. The blanket, lifted, catches a lick of air and pulls at your arms like a child who wishes to dance. You let it dance once, then you bring it back inside and lay it over the bed with care, letting it fall from your hands an inch above the sheet so it lands evenly and learns its place. You smooth from the middle outward, pressing with the flats of your palms to chase away the small hills that make cold pockets. The bolster looks proud beneath it for a heartbeat, like a captain beneath a sail, then settles to its quieter work. A sideways, peculiar tidbit, no law, just a habit you've seen in 2 houses and heard of in 3. Some folk tie 3 small knots in a blanket's corner before sleep, and they call those knots a ward against the nightmare, the pressing dream that rides the chest and steals the breath. The knots are loosed at dawn with a word no one likes to say out loud. Does it work? Perhaps belief makes its own warmth. Perhaps the knots give your hand something to do other than steal back the cover from a warmer neighbor. Either way, the corners of many a blanket carry the memory of tight fingers and patient string. You look along the blanket's edge and search for moth nibbles, the little half-moons that appear where a fold ate itself. You do not find fresh ones. You pinch up a loose thread and twist it back, kissing your teeth at your clumsiness last week when you snagged it on the stool. You tuck the foot end beneath the tick, a thumb's width, so it will hesitate before wandering off your shins at midnight. Your guest nods at this wisdom and tucks his side the same. You both stand a moment, admiring the plain, heavy sea of wool that will roll between your shoulders and the cold. Historians still argue whether households of your station in 14th century Brittany slept most nights beneath undyed, serviceable coverlets alone, or whether colored, patterned textile stripes, checks, simple embroidered edgings were more common than the sparse records suggest. Probate lists love to count a coverlet without telling what sort, and fragments that survive in damp earth do not confess their old colors easily. Some point to wills that cherish a red cloth or a blue say, others to tapestry tastes that never visited cottages like yours. The truth likely walks from house to house. A little color here, a plain pelt there, taste tempered by coin and kin. You stroke the blanket once more, the way a person might calm a mule before a bridge, and it repays you by lying flat, patient, unavoidable. Your wrists itch from the small fibers that love skin more than air. You rub them away on your sleeves and accept the tickle as part of the price of a winter night. You think of mornings when frost found the inside of the shutter and made a rhyme you could write your name in, and how on those days the blanket felt like roof and wall and door all at once. You climb under with practiced care, keeping the wool high to trap the warmth you brought with you. The guest follows in the same careful fashion, and for a lovely moment, the blanket behaves as if it were a fair-minded judge between 2 citizens. It will choose a favorite before the first hour is done, but for now, peace. The dog puts his nose to the foot and inhales the day from the cloth, then lies down, content that the bed smells like the right house. You take a slow breath and taste the small smoke, the clean cold, and the sheep that lived its life on a hillside you cannot see from here but can imagine. The single linen sheet lies folded on the chest like a peace treaty that has seen service. You lift it by 2 corners and feel its cool weight, heavier where patches have doubled the cloth, lighter where elbows and feet have asked their questions too many nights in a row. The weave is plain, the color the quiet, not quite white of things, washed often and boiled when there is fuel enough. You and your guest stand on either side of the bed and shake it once, gently, and the sheet falls with a sigh that maps the paillasse beneath. You smooth from the middle outward, palms flat, as if ironing with your own heat. He copies you, and the 2 of you make a silent covenant. No grabbing, no hoarding, no wrapping oneself. Like a roast in cloth, meant for 2. The edge nearest you has a narrow hem your aunt stitched after last winter's tear. You find the tiny crooked bite where her needle grabbed too much, and smile, because hands always leave their names in work. You tuck that hem to your side so the roughness won't tickle a tired lip at midnight. The guest looks away politely while you lean, lift, and slide, making the sheet lie close without pleading. The middle shows its old, pale valley. You press it flat, knowing it will return like a faithful river in an hour. You speak the necessary nothings that keep people from arguing about cloth. Which shoulder likes the cool edge, which knee finds itself uncovered in the small hours, which corner will be yours to tug when the blanket drifts. Your voices are low, more air than sound. You rehearse the choreography, turning backs, turning faces, finding space for a shared border that will hold until breath or dreams decide otherwise. The dog watches, understanding none of this and all of it. The sheet smells of lye and sun, even at night. A faint memory of ash lingers in one corner from the day it dried too near the hearth. It will not offend you. You run your knuckles along the side to chase out a wrinkle that would become a rope beneath a rib. The guest lays a hand, flat as a blessing, to quiet a stubborn crease. You thank him with your eyes, the language of houses at this hour. A plain, serviceable fact stands up in the dimness. In homes like yours, the single communal sheet is the ordinary skin between sleeper and straw, washed when water, fuel, and weather allow, mended as needed, shared without drama because beds and cloth cost coin, and coin prefers bread, seed, and tax. 2 sheets, one under. One over belong to rooms with shutters that fit tighter, and purses that open easier. Your one does the work meant for 2, and does not complain, except in creases. A small wandering tidbit tiptoes in from old mouths. Some households mark a tiny thread, cross in blue near one corner, just 2 stitches, as a sign that the sheet, like the bed, is meant to keep the night's wandering spirits from settling down uninvited. The cross always hides by the feet, where no one would kiss it or make a ceremony of it. Whether the thread guards breath or simply keeps grandmothers content is not a matter you test. The little sign offends no one and wastes almost no floss. Historians still argue whether linen sheets in 14th century Breton cottages were most often homespun and coarse from local flax, or if market days brought in smoother, purchased cloth more commonly than the sparse mentions in wills suggest. A bequest might say, 1 sheet, and the parchment stays stubbornly silent about weave, fineness, or stripe. The fragments found in damp earth do not confess their origin, and cloth that works hard tends to vanish rather than pose for memory. You fold back the head end in a neat breadth so the sheet will meet your chin kindly, and you pat the fold into obedience. The guest mirrors you, making a clean straight that looks for a heartbeat like a table laid for sleep. You both step aside to admire the simple correctness of it. There is satisfaction in a sheet that lies flat before the night complicates it. You slip beneath and hold still while the cloth cools your skin, then warms in a slow tide. The guest enters his side like a careful swimmer easing into water. For a moment the sheet is a gentle boundary, not a battlefield, a smooth field where 2 new furrows will soon be plowed by breath. You keep your hands in the neutral middle, not to claim, but to guard the agreement. The rush of your own lungs slows to match the house's softer rhythm. The sheet settles, accepts you, and promises to tug back and forth the way tides do without malice, with persistence. The bolster is long enough to pretend it is wise. You lift it with both arms, linen case a little yellowed at the seams, stuffed with whatever the year offered, chopped straw, and a fistful of tow, a scatter of feather plucked from hens who did not volunteer fully, and lay it across the head of the bed like a soft wall. Your guest takes the far end and aligns it under the fold of the sheet, and the 2 of you look at it with the mutual hope given to fences built from rope and good intentions. It is the neutral middle, the border agreed upon without oath, the cushion that is supposed to keep noses on their own sides and murmurings directed toward the dark rather than toward each other. You press the bolster with your palm and feel its uneven speeches, plump at 1/3, poorer at another, a narrow cove in the middle where heads settle by habit. You give it a few brisk thumps, no anger, just persuasion, and the filling redistributes like common sense returning after a boast. The linen cover shows a mend where someone used a different thread, darker, so the seam reads like a chalk line. You smooth that scar and decide to sleep with your neck to the evenest place because, in this small kingdom, you are allowed one preference. Your guest offers the suggestion of tying a thin cord around the middle to keep it from rolling exile ward in the night. You nod. Whether it works is a question you have asked many times and never fully answered. You choose a bit of flax line from the peg, loop it once, twice, and make a simple knot that can be loosed by a sleepy tug. The bolster now wears a belt. It will still desert its post at the first trumpet call of snore, but you have given it a reason to feel ashamed when it does. A plain fact, sturdy as oak. Many beds in these parts use a long bolster under the sheet, a shared brace for neck and shoulder that protects a thin pillow if you have one, and replaces it if you do not. It keeps heads from sliding to the hard frame, fills the void where rope lattice sags, and in theory, marks a polite border between co-sleepers who may prefer diplomacy over intimacy. In richer rooms, the bolster is one citizen among pillows. Here, it is the mayor, the clerk, and the town crier at once. A small, wry tidbit sidles in. More than one house swears by tucking a sprig of rosemary or a twist of yarrow inside the bolster's mouth before gatherings or feast eves, to keep tongues sweet and dreams reasonable. The scent is faint as a memory but pleasant, and if it fails to calm a quarrelsome sleeper, it at least makes the first breaths of bed smell like a garden that learned its manners. Historians still argue whether the Breton taste for enclosed, cupboard-like beds later famed in the region shaped the habit of bolsters as boundary markers in earlier centuries, or if the bolster's diplomacy is simply a long European custom that pays no special allegiance to woodwork. Carved beds survive to be admired. Bolsters rarely do. So the scholars lean on mentions in house lists, and the odd painting where a long, pale roll lurks beneath a sheet like a sleeping eel. You slide beneath the sheet and lay the side of your head on the bolster. It accepts your weight with a sigh and a small, complaining crunch where the chopped straw remembers it was once a stalk. Your guest lowers his own head at the other end, and for a breath you are 2 peaks in a small, soft range. The cord you looped gives the bolster a spine, and it holds straight, proud of its office. You find the spot where your neck feels neither pushed nor allowed to collapse. That balance is a private treaty, renewed nightly. The bolster's presence makes breathing a little easier when the room's air lies close. Your jaw loosens, your eyelids drop a finger's breadth lower. You wait, just a beat, to see if the mare will betray you by rolling. It does not, yet. You taste a ghost of herb in the cloth, perhaps from some earlier knot of rosemary left there by habit, and you allow yourself the small silliness of believing it will keep your words kind should you mutter in dreams. The guest's breath evens. The room approves. The border holds for now. The basin waits on the stool, a small round lake of cold that forgets it ever knew fire. You carry it to the hearth's margin and kneel with the patient resignation of feet that have walked, stood, and carried the day's weight without grievance, and now demand tribute. Your guest looks toward the shutter with the expression of a man debating courage. You wave him to go first, and he shakes his head in that courteous dance of refusal that ends, as courtesy should, with you choosing, without drama. You dip 2 fingers, test the cold, and smile because sometimes shock is better than ache. You sit back, ease a heel into your lap, and put the foot to water. The skin tightens in surprise, then learns to be a lake stone. Dirt blooms from the cracks at nail and sole, a faint brown sky swirling in the little bowl. You rub with your thumb, not to chase virtue, but to unstick the day. The basin's tin lip kisses your ankle. You shift to avoid its bite. The rushlight makes a little halo on the water, your toes a dwarf constellation beneath. You switch feet, pour a palm's worth across the top to chase grit from ankle bone, then dab the clean rag you keep for this, an old sleeve, hemmed by your cousin when talk ran out and hands needed work. The cloth is rough and perfect. You wipe in slow lines, heel to toe. Each pass a sigh you didn't know you were holding. Your calf loosens. Your knees remember they are not only hinges, but also creatures who like kindness. By the door, the dog watches with the professional interest of one who believes all bowls might become his concern. A plain, unromantic fact of these parts. The day ends, when it can, with a brief washing of feet, especially in seasons of mud and dust. Full baths are feasts for water and fuel. Basins are ordinary mercies. Priests may preach cleanliness of soul. Cottages tend to the parts that ache and track dirt into bed. A little wash keeps the sheet cleaner a few days longer, and a person sleeps as if lifted a thumb width above the straw. A small sideways tidbit the old women swear by. Drop a pinch of warmed salt into the basin on damp nights to keep chills from climbing the legs. Whether the salt rebukes the cold or simply makes the water feel like soup for the skin, the superstition harms no one and gives the wash a taste of ceremony. On feast eves, some houses add a crushed sprig of thyme. The basin smells like a stew that won't be served, and somehow the bed seems kinder. Historians still argue whether basins in your century were more often wood, ceramic, or hammered metal in cottages near the Breton coast, and whether households kept one basin for washing and another for dough and milk. Records list basins without declaring their loyalties, and painters are generous with gleam when they mean to flatter. The truth, as usual, likely sits in the corner, a serviceable bowl pressed to many duties, scoured with sand, and kissed by smoke. You pass the basin to your guest without comment. He takes it like a man accepting a small blessing, and copies your motions with an economy that admits he learned this lesson on hard floors in other places. He wipes, shakes, and tips the water toward the hearth's darker corner, where it can go back to ground without wetting the house's heart. You hang the cloth on the peg to dry into a board by morning. Your feet, awake from the cold, now feel warmer in contrast. They curl under the sheet like contented animals returning to their den. The chill that clung to your ankles has retreated. A mild, pleasant sting remains, the kind that lets you know you are a body in ownership of itself. You blow on your toes, a childish indulgence no one can scold at this hour. Then slide them beneath the blanket, where they meet the dog's investigating nose. He approves and gives you back a small, warm huff. You thank him with a nudge and a whisper that means nothing and everything. The basin glints once in the rushlight, then forgets to shine. Your heels, clean enough, tell your spine that the day has agreed to be done. You turn your back to the hearth's low glow and face the gentle darkness of the bed, where the night chemise waits, folded like a truce. Untying hose at this hour is a quiet arithmetic. Garter, knot, the small give of wool that has held you upright since dawn. You sit on the bed's edge, lift one knee, and find the knot by feel fingers learning their way along a cord that you tied in full light and must now persuade in half. The garter yields. The hose slouch down your shins with the sleepy relief of a task completed. Cold air touches the skin there and recites its short sermon about seasons. You listen and accept. You pull the chemise over your head, a simple linen that knows your shoulders and falls to your knees. Clean enough because it was aired today and not worked in. The cloth is cool, then patient. The neck's edge shows a tiny scallop where needle and hand once disagreed. You smooth it and decide the scallop can stay proud. Your day shirt, smoke salted and honest, goes over the chest rail to carry its strength into tomorrow. You feel smaller now, somehow lighter, as if the day's chores were sewn into the hose and set aside with them. You fold the hose in half, then half again, and lay them on the stool where morning hands will thank you for neatness. Your belt coils into itself on the chest, a quiet snake that will behave at dawn. The guest, turned politely away, fumbles with his own knots, and mutters a satisfied nothing when cord meets sense. He keeps to his side, which is the kind of wealth that matters in small rooms. The dog, professional as always, averts his eyes out of habit, learned from being scolded for watching guests too closely. A plain fact stands without flourish. Night. Camise is simple. Pull-over linen shifts serve as the common covering for sleep in houses like yours. A clean layer between the skin and the bed that can be laundered more easily than blankets and ticks. The chemise carries away sweat and a day's clinging smells. It is a modesty and a mercy, and on cold nights it keeps warmth near without inviting the smoke. Sweet cloak into bed. Hose, long and loyal, are unfastened to let blood remember its easier path. A small, homely tidbit belongs to the corner peg. Some folk leave a sprig of juniper or a twist of dried lavender hung near the chemise, believing the scent blesses the cloth and wakens kind dreams. The chemise smells faintly of field and sun when brought to face in the night, and if dreams obey herbs as often as they obey supper, no one minds the trick. On certain saints' eves, a ribbon might be pinned to the hem to tie down wandering thoughts. The ribbon is reused until it loses color and ambition. Historians still argue whether working folk in 14th century Brittany commonly wore separate bed caps or simply drew the chemise's neck higher and trusted a blanket to guard ears from drafts. Paintings favor caps when they wish to be charming. Records do not often list caps unless they were fine enough to matter to heirs. The wind through shutter gaps tells its own truth, and households answer with what hands and cloth allow. You climb beneath the sheet and blanket with the modesty that comes from doing so 1,000 times. The chemise whispering against linen, where the hush-like pages turn slowly. Fabric settles over collarbone and wrist, bringing with it the small piece of clean cloth on clean enough skin. Your knees find their second, kinder place on the tick. The guest's movements are as careful as yours, managed without drama, full of that neutral politeness of strangers, sharing the same narrow moon. You pull the chemise hem taut against your thighs to make a smooth plane, where rough straw will otherwise find a pinion. One palm tucks the side beneath your hip, a trick learned from older cousins who refused to wake scratching where linen rode up. Your shoulders exhale. The bolster holds its line. The night folds around you like a letter slipped into a safe pocket. The chemise keeps the day at arm's length. You let your breath slow in company with your guests, two small bellows learning each other's pace. The house approves. You are ready to let sleep manage the rest. The rushlight stub waits in its iron beak, a pale reed stripped and dipped, holding one last thumb's worth of courage. You bring it close to the hearth and trim the blackened tip between two wetted fingers. The soft crackle loud in a room that has run out of speeches. The small flame steadies, then learns to be quiet, a moth that has agreed to sit still. Light makes a little yellow pond on the table where the cup, the spoon, and the coarse salt live like three old friends who never go to bed before you do. You look around at the tasks that prefer to be persuaded at night rather than greeted in a rush at dawn, and you begin the slow tour of duty that tucks a household in. Kindling first. You count the thin splits by touch 1 for the morning's tongue of fire, 2 more for insurance against lazy coals, and a crooked sliver because crooked things burn bravely. You lay them in a neat sheaf beside the hearthstone, so your hand will find them without hunting. Then the larger billets. You pull one closer, near enough to warm and dry, far enough not to go up in cheerful treason while you sleep. The dog watches, calculates whether any stick will become a game, and decides against it with a sigh that belongs to saints and old hounds. You spoon a drift of ash over the embers until they hide their eyes, leaving a red or two peering like watchmen through fog. The kettle, emptied of its evening usefulness, gets a small rinse and a respectful tilt to keep the lip dry. You put the ladle's bowl downward, an old habit taught with a tap to the knuckles so no spider thinks it a chapel and no mouse a boat. The table is cleared of crumbs, generous enough to invite nocturnal negotiation. The last of the crust goes into the covered pot, because mice appreciate hospitality and do not repay it. Your guest unlaces his bundle and tucks it under the bed frame on his side, close enough to feel, but not to bruise. He places his day knife beneath the chest slip, again, point turned away, a gentlemanly arrangement between blade and plank. Shoes find their pair at the door, toes facing outward, as if eager for morning, heels touching like two cousins whispering. You slip your belt through them, one end of old leather looped through both throats, so no curious hand in darkness can wander off with them without singing the buckle's little iron song. The door bar settles into its cradle with that comforting wooden thud that says the night has understood the rules. You pinch the rushlight lower, a thumb's breadth at a time, nursing the remaining tallow along the reed as if feeding a small bird on crumbs. Its flame throws tender ladders up the beam and makes your palm look like a parchment map when you pass between it and the wall. The iron holder is simple 2 jaws, a stem, a foot, and its shadow on the wall looks like long-legged fowls stalking the marsh. You wipe the jaws with the corner of your apron, a quick swipe to keep tallow from crusting into grudge. At the sill you slip the shutter pin once, twice, to be sure, and nudge the wedge so the rattling board will remember its manners if the wind grows opinionated. A plain, steady fact sits down beside you and warms its hands. In houses like yours along this coast and inland, the common nightlight is a rushlight or a tallow dip-stripped marsh rushes or twists of fiber, soaked in rendered fat, clipped in iron, or propped in clay, nursed short, and used sparingly so oil and tallow will last through seasons that always ask for more than they receive. Candles of fine wax belong to churches and to rooms with chests that do not sigh when opened. Your light is humble, practical, and it does the noble work of keeping toes from table legs and thoughts from too much dark. A small, curious tidbit you learned from a neighbor with more stories than teeth. She sets a pin at a certain height in a tallow dip before she prays in winter, and when the flame reaches the pin and dims, she knows she has given the right shortness of words to heaven and can go to bed. On the coast, an uncle once bragged of burning slivers of resinous pine as splints, bright and spit-tempered, but you favor the quiet of reed. And a cousin swears his mother wedged a rush in a split carrot when the iron holder went missing. The carrot smoked, but it obeyed, and they laughed themselves warm. Historians still argue whether purpose-made rushlight holders, those clever little nippers with counterweights, were common in your century here, or whether most cottages leaned on simpler clamps, candlesticks for tallow dips, and such improvised cradles as carrot and clay. The records are shy about small iron, and pictures arrive from later hands. Digs give up scorched pebbles, and soot but few jaws of proof. What is certain is that night needed tending, and hands found the tools they could. You test the bedding's edge with the back of your fingers to be sure no stray ember or spark has jumped foolishly. None has. The broom bristles upward, claims its corner like a badger guarding a burrow. You set flint, steel, and a twist of charred rag together in their familiar dish, a little trinity of morning flame. The guest pours a palm of water into the small basin and leaves it by the hearth in case a throat wakes thirsty enough to walk but not talk. You nod thanks. The dog receives a final ear stroke, paid in advance for the warmth he will arrange over your shins at some undecided hour. The last small task is the one you always pretend not to need, and always perform. You speak into the room the brief inventory of things that matter: bar, pin, banked coals, shoes tied, knife hidden, basin set, door blessed with touch, and the room, hearing its own name called section by section, agrees to be your accomplice. The rushlight shrinks to a brave dot. You lift it and touch it to ash, and it becomes a red thought, then a memory. Darkness comes down like a cloak drunk on wood smoke, warm at the edges, open at the throat. You find your side of the bed without doubt. Lie down into straw you coaxed yourself, and pull the wool to your chin. The house has been tidied into silence. The night accepts your careful surrender. The rushlight stub waits in its iron beak, a pale reed stripped and dipped, holding one last thumb's worth of courage. You bring it close to the hearth and trim the blackened tip between two wetted fingers. The soft crackle loud in a room that has run out of speeches. The small flame steadies, then learns to be quiet, a moth that has agreed to sit still. Light makes a little yellow pond on the table, where the cup, the spoon, and the coarse salt live like three old friends who never go to bed before you do. You look around at the tasks that prefer to be persuaded at night rather than greeted in a rush at dawn, and you begin the slow tour of duty that tucks a household in. Kindling first. You count the thin splits, by touch one for the morning's tongue of fire, two more for insurance against lazy coals, and a crooked sliver because crooked things burn bravely. You lay them in a neat sheaf beside the hearthstone so your hand will find them without hunting. Then the larger billets. You pull one closer, near enough to warm and dry, far enough not to go up in cheerful treason while you sleep. The dog watches, calculates whether any stick will become a game, and decides against it with a sigh that belongs to saints and old hounds. You spoon a drift of ash over the embers until they hide their eyes, leaving a red or two peering like watchmen through fog. The kettle, emptied of its evening usefulness, gets a small rinse and a respectful tilt to keep the lip dry. You put the ladle's bowl downward, an old habit taught with a tap to the knuckles, so no spider thinks it a chapel, and no mouse a boat. The table is cleared of crumbs, generous enough to invite nocturnal negotiation. The last of the crust goes into the covered pot, because mice appreciate hospitality, and do not repay it. Your guest unlaces his bundle, and tucks it under the bed frame on his side, close enough to feel, but not to bruise. He places his day knife beneath the chest lip, again point turned away, a gentlemanly arrangement between blade and plank. Shoes find their pair at the door, toes facing outward, as if eager for morning, heels touching like two cousins whispering. You slip your belt through them, one end of old leather looped through both throats, so no curious hand in darkness can wander off with them without singing the buckle's little iron song. The door bar settles into its cradle, with that comforting wooden thud that says the night has understood the rules. You pinch the rushlight lower, a thumb's breadth at a time, nursing the remaining tallow along the reed, as if feeding a small bird on crumbs. Its flame throws tender ladders up the beam and makes your palm look like a parchment map when you pass between it and the wall. The iron holder is simple two jaws, a stem, a foot, and its shadow on the wall looks like long-legged fowls stalking the marsh. You wipe the jaws with the corner of your apron, a quick swipe to keep tallow from crusting into grudge. At the sill, you slip the shutter pin once, twice to be sure, and nudge the wedge so the rattling board will remember its manners if the wind grows opinionated. A plain, steady fact sits down beside you and warms its hands. In houses like yours along this coast and inland, the common nightlight is a rushlight, or a tallow dip-stripped marsh rushes, or twists of fiber soaked in rendered fat, clipped in iron, or propped in clay, nursed short, and used sparingly so oil and tallow will last through seasons that always ask for more than they receive. Candles of fine wax belong to churches and to rooms with chests that do not sigh when opened. Your light is humble, practical, and it does the noble work of keeping toes from table legs and thoughts from too much dark. A small, curious tidbit you learn from a neighbor with more stories than teeth. She sets a pin at a certain height in a tallow dip before she prays in winter, and when the flame reaches the pin and dims, she knows she has given the right shortness of words to heaven and can go to bed. On the coast, an uncle once bragged of burning slivers of resinous pine as splints, bright and spit-tempered, but you favor the quiet of reed. And a cousin swears his mother wedged a rush in a split carrot when the iron holder went missing. The carrot smoked, but it obeyed, and they laughed themselves warm. Historians still argue whether purpose-made rushlight holders, those clever little nippers with counterweights, were common in your century here, or whether most cottages leaned on simpler clamps, candlesticks for tallow dips, and such improvised cradles as carrot and clay. The records are shy about small iron, and pictures arrive from later hands. Digs give up scorched pebbles and soot, but few jaws of proof. What is certain is that night needed tending, and hands found the tools they could. You test the bedding's edge with the back of your fingers. To be sure, no stray ember or spark has jumped foolishly. None has. The broom bristles upward, claims its corner like a badger guarding a burrow. You set flint, steel, and a twist of charred rag together in their familiar dish, a little trinity of morning flame. The guest pours a palm of water into the small basin and leaves it by the hearth in case a throat wakes thirsty enough to walk but not talk. You nod thanks. The dog receives a final ear stroke, paid in advance for the warmth he will arrange over your shins at some undecided hour. The last small task is the one you always pretend not to need and always perform. You speak into the room the brief inventory of things that matter: bar, pin, bank coals, shoes tied, knife hidden, basin set, door blessed with touch, and the room, hearing its own name called section by section, agrees to be your accomplice. The rushlight shrinks to a brave dot. You lift it and touch it to ash, and it becomes a red thought, then a memory. Darkness comes down like a cloak drunk on wood smoke, warm at the edges, open at the throat. You find your side of the bed without doubt, lie down into straw you coaxed yourself, and pull the wool to your chin. The house has been tidied into silence. The night accepts your careful surrender. You and the stranger practice the bedtime politeness that keeps a narrow mattress from becoming a battlefield. Names first, softly, so as not to wake the parts of the room that already sleep. Your baptized name, his, each of you adding the little tale that tells from where you come, because in these parts a person is not finished until the parish is spoken. You say yours in the local way, a little swallowed at the middle. He says his with a road's dust on every syllable. You trade the kind of small truths that fit in a palm how far he has walked, which cross he touched at dusk, where the lane puddles deepest after rain, and the kind of small lies that keep a night gentler, that you never snore, that your bed never gives splinters, that your dog will not steal his socks for a pillow. There is the dance of ages, too. You estimate his years by his knees when he sits, by how quickly he finds the right corner of the blanket, by the way he pats the bolster like a mule he must trust. He guesses yours from the steady way you tidy the last little things. You both pretend to be younger in your words than in your bones, because the night is easier to share when you are travelers rather than relics. You ask whether he prefers to face the wall or the room. He chooses the room, out of courtesy to drafts or out of habit from sleeping near doors. You take the wall, not because you are braver, but because you know where the bed gives and where it holds. You speak of weather, that great, safe monarch. He tells of a ridge where the wind piled cloud like wool, and you answer with the memory of a spring when rain taught the thatch to sing for a week. He knows the smell of the sea when it is angry. You know the smell of peat when it is damp. Between you, the map of the world becomes a list of cents. It is a good way to measure distance when coins are short and roads are long. The dog, hearing the lazy music of voices, thumps once to say he too has opinions but will spare you. Then the saints, in case either of you offends the others, he touches the little cross at his throat. You trace the one cut into the beam, and remark lightly that St. Eve minds this house, whether invited or not. He nods, careful of the bolster's truce line. You do not ask his business beyond road and errand, and he does not ask yours beyond house and work. Questions too sharp at night can pierce the blanket and let in weather. The evenly measured breathing of the room invites gentler talk. He tells you of a midwife in a village farther west who sleeps with her shoes pointed toward the door, never toward the bed, so she can run out without arguing with leather when summons come at midnight. You answer with your aunt who lays a spoon across a cup to close the mouth of the house before sleep when guests are present, so gossip cannot fly out and wake neighbors. You both smile, because houses contain more custom than furniture. A plain historical fact settles between you like a third pillow. Along this coast and plain in the 14th century, visitors and kin often shared mattresses and pallets as a matter of course. A bed was not a private altar, but a household tool, and hospitality meant room on the straw as much as bread on the board. Parish inns existed, where roads were busy, but most travelers leaned on doors like yours, and were taken in, under obligation, under custom, under the watchful eyes of saints and neighbors who preferred a guest in a bed to a body in a ditch. A smaller, quirkish tidbit slips in with the hush. In a few houses, especially those jealous of quiet, the host would murmur the room's name aloud: bed, hearth, door, beam, after introductions, as if reminding each thing to behave while strangers sleep under it. Others press the bed key, that little wooden handle for the rope lattice, under the bolster, believing it keeps the knots from loosening and, by some sideways logic, keeps tongues from loosening too. Whether the objects obey is hard to prove. The people certainly try. Historians still argue whether fixed surnames had taken firm root among common folk here by your century's middle, or whether most still used a mix of patronymics, toponyms, and bynames that changed with trade. Temper, or Harvest Jean's son of Elaine one year, Jean of the Mill the next, Jean Short Knee, in the mouth of a neighbor with a grin. Court rolls and tax lists show both habits walking side by side, and the scholar's ink cannot always tell which Jean warmed which bolster, in which cottage on a wet night. The stranger names two villages you know only by their saints' days, and you return with the name of a market where you once bought a comb too dear for its teeth. You both perform the courtesy of finding something admirable in places neither of you will see again. A good baker, a fence that did not lie, a bridge that behaved. He compliments your hearth for drawing well, and you accept the compliment on behalf of Ash that has learned its manners. You show him where to set his cup on the table so it will not be overturned by the morning's first clumsy hand. He shows you the trick of folding a cloak so the damp lives at the edge and not at the middle. You share, without remark, the knowledge that most of a life is made of such little exchanges, thread passing between needles, one house trading a trick for another. In the dark, this looks like kindness. In daylight, it will still be kindness, but will wear the face of thrift. Your voices dwindle to that low pre-sleep murmur that is mostly breath with a word at the end. The house hears and agrees to stop creaking. You say sleep well without wishing too hard, because wishes at this hour can wake the jealous. He answers with the traveler's benediction, half mumbled, about quiet feet in dreams. The bolster, for once, remains in office. The blanket begins its slow loyalty test, and has not yet chosen sides. You both lie on your declared edges, conquerors of exactly half a bed, and not an inch more. You pull the sheet to your chin, and feel the old comfort of having said your name into the same room as another person who for one night carries it with you. The world, which spends its days being very large, becomes as small as 2 elbows and the width of a bolster. That is manageable. The stranger's breath finds a rhythm that asks very little of you. You let your thoughts line up like spoons in a drawer and close the drawer softly. Courtesy has been paid. Tomorrow will have its own coins. Tonight, the bed is an agreement written in wool and sleep. You and the guest make the formal, unspoken choice that turns a narrow bed into a treaty. Backs presented, faces spared. You draw a careful line with your spine, offering it like a shield and a kindness. He answers in the same language, a rustle of chemise, and the small thud of a shoulder finding the bolster's good spot. Between you, the sheet lies like a calm river that is also, unfortunately, a little cold at first touch. You pull the blanket to your ear and hear the wool's soft rasp, a sound that says it will forgive much and forget nothing. The edge is your country tonight. You test it with a knee and discover the exact place where rope gives way to air, where the floor begins to make quiet promises to your ribs. You shift a thumb inward and stake your claim the way a farmer moves a stone at a field's boundary, so the furrow will run true. Your hip learns the mattress's slope. Your shoulder learns the bolster's patience. Your ankle remembers to tuck behind the other so your heel does not surprise your guest like a visiting beetle. He clears his throat once, a polite declaration that he will now choose stillness. You answer with stillness of your own, though your elbow holds a small debate with the blanket, seeking an angle that permits dignity and warmth. The room listens with that particular hush it keeps for people who are trying very hard not to move. Your breath and his form 2 slow ropes, twisted together by the air into something sturdy enough to hang the rest of the night upon. A plain fact settles in beside the bolster without ceremony. Among ordinary households and roadside lodgings in your century, it is customary for unrelated sleepers to lie back to back, each turned outward if the wall allows, so faces do not converse beyond necessity, and the night may go about its business without confusion. This habit is thrift, dressed as etiquette, space respected, warmth shared, and conversation postponed until bread has been cut in the morning. Even in larger beds, backs often stand as sentries for peace. You measure distance in finger widths. 2 from the bed frame, 1 from the sheet's stitched edge, 3 from the mysterious canyon the straw has already begun to carve between you. You hook a corner of the linen under your hip to keep it from wandering uphill, a small trick learned from an aunt who swore sheets behave better when given assignments. The dog, reassured by the quiet math of your breathing, nudges his nose under the foot of the blanket and takes his post as keeper of ankles in dreams. The shutter rattles once, then thinks better of it. A faint draft writes its chilly signature along your exposed cheek. You turn your face a fraction toward the bolster and invent a windbreak from your own shoulder. Your guess follows the same geometry a breath later. You are 2 half moons, bent the same way, making a circle that almost closes. The mattress dips, reconsiders, and comes to rest. The rope lattice sends up a muted complaint that only tired people can hear. A small, sideways tidbit puts its elbow on the bolster's belt and grins. A few houses, jealous of strict boundaries, will slip a length of narrow cloth, the peace strip. Your godmother called it beneath the sheet and over the bolster's top, tucking it tight on both sides, so that each sleeper has a private shore to beach upon. It is not a curtain and not a wall, just a reminder made of linen that keeps wandering hands from telling stories to which they were not invited. Whether it works depends on the cloth's tightness and the sleeper's honesty. Your shoulders begin to forget they are planks and recall they are flesh. Heat blooms where your back meets the blanket, a garden walled by wool. Your knees make the quiet compromises knees always make. The edge stops being a cliff and becomes instead a strict neighbor whose hedges you admire from a respectable distance. You breathe with the room straw, ash, wool, a dog's faint warm cereal smell, and discover the old truth that a bed gives back what you lend it. So you lend it patience, measured one heartbeat at a time. Historians still argue whether travelers in 14th century Brittany more often slept crosswise at crowded inns, three abreast like loaves on a peel, or lengthwise in pairs as in cottages, and whether hosts signaled preferred arrangements by where they set the bolster, or by which side of the bed they invited a guest to take. Inn ordinances written later offer tidy rules. The earlier decades leave you with hints, a handful of moralist scolds, and the particular imprecision of memories told at market. You think briefly of the floor, of pallets and benches, and of nights when even a table served, and you forgive this bed its narrowness, because it has chosen to be a bed rather than a board. Your guest's breath catches once, reforms itself into a softer pattern, and you allow the small pride that your house has taught him how to sleep politely. You attend to your own breath, as if it were a craft steady, modest, repetitive, the way you might card wool or turn soil. Nothing grand, everything necessary. The blanket begins its old measured treachery, inching toward the warmer body by a logic knit into it before you were born. You anticipate, nip back an inch with 2 fingers, and let the rest pass for now. Battles at this hour are best fought with patience rather than force. The bolster holds, the sheet holds, the room holds. The edge feels less like a sentence and more like a line in a psalm you know by heart. Sleep approaches, wearing soft shoes, counting your rib bones like beads on a cord, and you decide to let it finish the count. The night finds every seam the carpenter ever left and writes its cool name there, letter by letter. You feel it first across the cheek. You turned outward, an inquisitive thread of air drawing a careful line from temple to jaw, then along your wrist, where the sheet forgot to patrol. The shutter rattles once with a private opinion, then rests, but the draft keeps its appointment, slipping through the hairline places like a clever mouse that knows the kitchen better than you do. You turn a finger's width toward the bolster and build yourself a windbreak out of bone and patience. The house has its small tricks for this. You reach behind you and, without rising, find the rolled rag that lives on the sill for just such hours. It is a retired sleeve, hemmed and stuffed with wool scrap, and it understands the honorable trade of being a snake that blocks other snakes. You wedge it in the seam where shutter and frame talk too freely, and the draft's sharpness softens to a kinder breath. Your guest, feeling the same invisible river on his side, buries his nose a little deeper in the fold of blanket, which is the oldest solution, and the one that always works until it doesn't. Air has a grammar you can learn in any cottage. It enters at cracks, searches corners, rehearses its song along beams blackened by years of smoke, and goes out where it pleases, not always where you ask. When it finds you, it means no unkindness. It simply refuses to remember that you are not a candle. You cup your shoulder with your own arm and discover that the body makes a decent door when wood forgets. A plain, workable fact belongs to the sill. Most windows in houses like yours are unglazed wooden shutters within and without. Sometimes a stretched parchment or oiled linen to lend a pale ghost of daylight, and a little mercy against wind. No glass to scold the purse and the joiner's care. Plus, whatever cloth and moss a housewife persuades into gaps is what stands between breath and weather. In better rooms, horn or small panes may appear. In yours, a good wedge and a forgiving blanket are the art. You listen to the draft move from shutter pin to door bar, to the fine crack where wall and floor are considering a future separation. The bed answers each little breeze with a new idea. A fold of sheet lifts, a corner of blanket size. A stray lock of hair tickles your lip as if asking to be remembered. You tuck the hair behind your ear, nudge the blanket toward your chin, and let the draft become part of the room's breathing rather than an enemy of yours. A small, homely tidbit, the sort grandmothers hand down with recipes. Some houses sprinkle a pinch of ashes along the sill before sleep. Not for luck, but to read the wind in the morning if ashes drift inward. You dress warmer. If they blow outward, you scold the shutter. If they lie still, you give thanks to every nail that remembered its duty. Others twist a length of sheep's wool and press it into the seam like a soft rope. When spring comes, the birds steal it for nests, and everyone agrees the trade is fair. Historians still argue whether, by your century's middle along this Breton coast, oiled cloth lights and thin parchment screens were ordinary in humbler cottages, or rare comforts, mostly found where trade brushed its sleeve against a town. Inventories name shutters and sometimes lights, but the words cover many practices, and archaeology, which loves to keep nails and jettisons cloth, will not swear an oath about what lived in the openings of most walls. The debate, like the wind, goes on traveling. You consider rising to push the wedge harder, then decide dignity can remain horizontal. The dog, sensitive to breezes that might carry smells of fox or sausage, lifts his head, tastes the air, and, disappointed by its pure, clean nothing, returns his muzzle to his tail with a huff that puffs your toes. You use that borrowed warmth as interest on your own, curling your feet against each other until they agree to be less dramatic. The draft's edge thins as the room learns your new angles. You notice now the more patient air that sits in the rafters, warmed by smoke that climbed earlier and decided to stay as a guardian. You sense the tiny convection between ember and shutter, the room's slow circulations like small, invisible tides. You have shared beds in houses where wind came like a knife, and beds where wind could not be persuaded to visit at all. Tonight's is only a quill pen, signing its name and moving on. Your guest coughs once, the dry, apologetic kind that says, "I did not mean to advertise my throat." You answer with the little noise that means, "None taken." He pulls the blanket over his ear, a gesture that might be prayer or strategy. You leave your ear bare, so you can hear the village's thin night, the distant dog answering no one. A cart late to sense. The sea. Or is it only wind in trees? Remembering how to hiss. When the draft returns, and it always returns, you meet it with the same calm you give to a child who wakes just to be assured that the house still stands. You are the house tonight. You hold the line at your shoulder, keep the sheet tidy at your waist, make a small island of your body that the wind must go around. It does. You sleep around it, the way a stream sleeps around a stone. Smoke never fully leaves a house like yours. It only learns its manners and takes a seat higher up. You taste it even now, faint and old. A ghost of stew and wet wood and last month's juniper drifting down from the beams. The rafters keep the record in soot, written layer on layer until the ceiling becomes night even at noon. Your eyes know the difference between fresh sting and this quiet residue. The first asks for a cough, the second asks for rest. Tonight the fire is banked, the kettle is silent, and the remainder is only a soft, warm word that the hearth once spoke and has not quite forgotten. You can map the path the smoke chose a few hours ago. It rose in a lazy ribbon, tested the room the way a cat tests a new bench, then drifted toward the hood's dark mouth, where stone and habit coaxed it to leave. Some portion always refused the invitation and explored the rafters instead, seasoning wood with a preservative that keeps beetle and memory at bay. Meat hung up on a winter day in that high weather will dry with the calm of a saint. Herbs laid along the beam will remember their perfumes longer than they would in any chest. A plain fact yawns and stretches by the hearth. In your time and place, chimneys with obedient flues are not yet the common citizens of cottages. Many hearths still live open to the room beneath a hood or simple louvre, or they stand central with smoke escaping to the rafters, and out through a vent that answers more to wind than to the householder. Smoke leaves slowly, sifting through thatch and cracks, and on wet days it sulks down again, attending supper uninvited. Everyone puts up with the guest, because warmth, like any lord, travels with a noisy retinue. You pull a breath through your teeth and catch the small sweetness that wood smoke gifts to sleep. It clings to linen, nestles in hair, makes even dreams smell like work well finished. Your guest, perhaps raised in a house with a stingier flue, sighs as if the room's air pleases him, and turns his face to the bolster, where the cloth holds a faint memory of last week's rosemary burned on embers to clean the breath, as your aunt says. That was a good evening. The smoke walked the corners like a priest, and the house settled with a quieter back. A sideways, homely tidbit lives in old women's pockets. When airing bedding, they pass it for a moment through the highest, gentlest smoke and say, "It teaches the fleas not to sing." Others swear by tossing a handful of apple peel into the coals to sweeten the room for guests. The peel blackens with a cheerful leap, and for a little while the air tastes like an orchard remembering rain. None of this is science in the way clerks love. All of it is science in the way houses understand. Historians still argue whether rural Brittany by your century saw much of the framed wall hearths with proper canopies that towns were slowly adopting, and how quickly the habit of true, narrow chimneys walked from manor to cottage. Accounts of repairs mention hoods and smoke canopies. Wills praise a good hearth, without describing its throat, and the earth offers soot but not schematics. The timeline smudges like charcoal when touched. You turn your mind to the small kindness that smoke, for all its mischief, does for timber. The black glaze on rafters is a shield against wet and worm, a preservative born from discomfort. Your grandfather claimed the rafters in a smoky house live almost as long as gossip. He also claimed that in the worst storms, when wind tries to pry off thatch like a thief, the soot weighted in the straw makes the roof hold tighter. Whether true or not, the roof above you is still present, which is proof enough at this hour. Smoke tells time here as well as bells. Early smoke is blue and playful. Late smoke is brown and stubborn. Sleeping smoke is only a perfume that lifts when a foot stirs embers by mistake. You consider whether to turn over and tuck your nose under the blanket to avoid the faint tickle the air is planning for your throat. You decide not to move. The bed rewards stillness with a slightly warmer plane. The dog, who wears smoke proudly in his fur, snorts a little dream and thumps his tail once against the frame. The room's air grows heavier as the banked coals surrender to ash. The smell of wool rises in turn, as if smoke has passed its baton to sheep. Your lungs slow to match the room's comfort. The old seasoned odor of beam and soot becomes, at last, not a thing you notice, but the background you would miss if a miracle of whitewashed perfection replaced it. You've entered houses like that in towns. Neat, pale, quick to chill, their walls sharp with lime. You admire them with your eyes and do not sleep any better there. Here, the smoke and you have an arrangement. You cough once, politely, in case a fleck of the past wants to leave you. It does not. You return to quiet and let the Rafters Museum of Suppers and Winters keep its archives without your help. In a little while, you will smell only wool and salt and dog. By morning, smoke will have climbed back to its beamed monastery to chant its dry, silent prayers. For now, it makes a blanket for the ceiling, and you, who do not sleep there, accept its presence like an elder cousin who never runs out of stories. The first itch is diplomatic. It arrives without accusation and waits to see whether you will pretend not to notice. You do, for the length of 3 breaths. Then you concede a single scratch at the ankle, slow and dignified, and the ambassador departs. A second envoy arrives somewhere behind the knee. You treat it with identical courtesy. Peace seems possible. Then, an ambitious little kingdom announces itself along the ribs where straw meets camise, and you engage in the old, careful art, scratching without waking the room, calming the skin without starting a war. You know many causes and few names. Straw is clean enough, but still remembers fields. Wool holds 1,000 small opinions in its nap. The day leaves salt at the waist and dust at the wrist. And because this is a human house, smaller citizens may be conducting their nightly festivals along your borders. You do not think about them with hatred. Hatred wakes a person. You think about them with policy. Linens aired, seams smoothed, nails kept blunt, combs ready for morning. You pinch the chemise hem and pull it flat along your thigh, so straw cannot make a tent and surprise you. You lift a shoulder a thumb width and let the itch pass beneath like a low cloud missing a hill. You scratch there with the measured rasp of 2 fingers. Exactly twice, no more. Your guest, likely negotiating his own frontier, coughs the half-cough of someone pretending to be a tree. Somewhere under the blanket, the dog shifts and presents his back, blissfully free of diplomacy. His scratching is a drum solo. You envy him, and then forgive yourself for envy. A plain, unblushing fact. Lice and fleas are commoners in this century, and this countryside as much as people are. They commute on seams and scalps, favor straw and pets, and are managed by combs, smoke, heat from the sun, and stubborn laundering rather than banished by miracles. Sheets and chemises take the campaign's brunt. Ticks are beaten, blankets are aired, cloaks are inspected along their favorite highways. You count victories in fewer bites and calmer nights, not in declarations of independence. A small, fragrant tidbit travels with gossip. Some folk tuck sprigs of rue, tansy, or southernwood near the bed, or inside the tick's mouth, the bitter scents said to sour the appetite of the little nations. Others burn a pinch of rosemary or juniper on the embers, and walk the smoke along the bedding with a fan of willow, talking to it as if it were a headstrong child. Whether herbs truly persuade or merely cheer the housewife, the room smells like a garden visited by fire, and sleepers believe themselves protected, which is a protection of its own kind. Historians still argue how much of the insect war was fought at night versus day among rural Bretons of your century, whether knit-combing was a morning court ritual, whether bedding took regular turns on hedges even in winter, whether certain herbs were local habit, or later embroidery on older practices. Parasites leave few polite records. What they leave in middens requires a scholar with a magnifying glass and a strong stomach. The documents prefer to talk about rents and soles, not fleas and lice, though the latter likely ruled more hours. You scratch again, gently. Where a seam has printed a thought along your hip, you shift the bolster with 2 fingers to make a smoother slope for your neck. Sometimes an itch is simply a nerve asking for a better pillow. You rub your shin against your other calf, slow as a cow against a post, and the small bliss that travels up the leg is almost enough to make you forgive every living thing that has ever borrowed your heat. You do not dig. Digging invites resentments. You stroke, you press, you distract. The camise, clean enough, does its good office of keeping skin from straw. You think, with gratitude, of the last hot day when you boiled it with ashlie until it behaved like a banner in the wind, and dried it in sun so bright that even the neighbor's cat blinked and retreated. That day's work lies cool against you now, a fortification as humble and heroic as any moat. Your mind tries, unhelpfully, to inventory every possible tiny traveler in the bed at once. You redirect it to the weather, to the smell of smoke, to the rhythm of your guest's breath, to the distant hiss of either sea or leaves. You rehearse a psalm without words. You count backwards along your fingers from 10 to 1, slow enough that each inch of skin you pass remembers how to lie still. The bed rewards you. The itches recede like gossip deprived of an audience. When the next campaign begins, and you will answer again with measured scratches and patient adjustments. You have all night to win by degrees. Dawn will bring combs and the small satisfaction of running fine teeth through hair until the world feels groomed and possible. For now, you make peace with the exact square of cloth beneath your hand, the exact span of skin between wrist and elbow. Peace is never everywhere at once. It is always in a place you can touch. The first snore arrives like a cart on a far road, a low, uncertain rumble that may be thunder or only an old wheel telling its story. You do not judge. You wait. The rumble finds confidence, climbs a little hill in the chest across from you, and rolls down again with a sigh that is almost a word. You choose patience as your blanket and pull it to your chin. Sleep is a noisy market. If you haggle with every vendor, you will never buy rest. You try the oldest remedy. Turn your own breath into a metronome just slower than his, a gentle weight that coaxes the room to follow you. Sometimes it works, as barns follow the slow sway of a cow. Sometimes it does not. Tonight it works halfway. The snore softens, then returns with a sort of apologetic shuffle. You allow yourself one small strategic cough. It is not a rebuke, it is a suggestion. The cart slows. The road finds a better grade. A plain, book-taught fact. One that even physicians repeat when they are not pretending to be wiser than houses. Many guides of health in your age advise sleeping first on the right side to aid digestion after supper, then, toward morning, turning to the left to rest the heart, and in any case avoiding the back, which makes snoring bolder and dreams heavier. The counsel sounds like common sense dressed for church. In beds like yours, it also keeps faces turned away, which is civility tucked inside hygiene. A small, smiling tidbit belongs quietly to this hour. Some housewives swear that placing a tiny pinch of salt beneath the tongue before lying down smooths breath and sweetens dreams. Others set a clove between teeth to teach the mouth to be a garden. A few knot a thread around a sleeper's big toe gently, lovingly claiming that the pull of the knot keeps the sleeper from rolling onto his back. Whether any of this persuades a determined snore is not a wager you would make, but the rituals keep peace better than complaints do. Historians still argue what everyday remedies against snoring and restless sleep truly circulated among common folk here in the 14th century. Beyond the elite medical texts that survive, household tricks pass by mouth and die with their tellers, and the ink that remains often favors Latin, leeches, and litanies over linen knots and well-timed coughs. Later folklore tempts scholars to reach backward, and sobriety pushes their hands down. The best evidence, as always, is the bed itself and the habits it teaches. You feel the bolster shift under two different heads learning to share a horizon. You press your cheek a fraction deeper and make the cushion a continent your neck can live on. Across the sheet, the snore changes shape to a drier rustle, like parchment turning. You encourage the change with silence. You do not count sheep. You count the space between his breaths and yours, which grows a little wider, then a little more, like a road you both agree not to travel right now. When the next stubborn roll of sound appears, you perform the tiny ceremony you learned from an aunt, with a tart tongue and a good heart. You raise your hand above the blanket an inch, and let it fall again with the softness of a moth landing. It makes no sound, and all the sound at once. The bed feels the gesture and passes the message along. Often the snorer, without waking, will turn his head a thumb towards stillness, as if someone had straightened a picture on the wall in his dream. Tonight, he does. You bless the aunt and her fierce kindness. Your mind, which delights in sabotage, offers to rehearse every complaint you could possibly make about the chorus beside you. You refuse. You rehearse instead a list of soft words that fit in the mouth, without moving the tongue: ash, wool, hush, dusk, until the words melt and become the thing they name. The room, pleased to be remembered accurately, settles nearer. If charity fails and the cart on the far road becomes a wagon parade, you have one last resort: the careful roll. You lift your hip a coin's height and roll the mattresses plane under you just enough to alter the angle of your own ribs. Sometimes this alone alters the music across the sheet. Beds are coupled instruments. Tune one string, and the other learns its new note. Tonight, you do not need this. The parade, sensing it has no audience, goes home. You let your mouth become the smallest possible doorway for air. You breathe as if sipping. The dog snores, once the most innocent of trumpets, then flops in a way that blames no one. The room's clock, which is no clock anyone can see, ticks by embers and the size of wood cooling. The stranger's breath has become only breath. You have won the night's quiet not by force, but by making a larger quiet around the noise until it learned to join. Blankets travel at night, slow and determined, like pilgrims who forgot which shrine they were heading for and decided to stop at the warmest one. You feel yours beginning its old migration toward the guest, inch by inch, as if pulled by a tide that respects only body heat. You let it go. A finger's width generosity is cheaper than wrestling, then pinch back in equal measure with the stealth of a person stealing a grape at market. The wool behaves as wool does. It yields, then plots. You secure your position with simple geometry. One hand captures a corner and tucks it under the edge of the tick near your hip. Not so tight, it will argue at midnight. Not so loose, it will surrender at the first temptation. Your knee forms a quiet anchor at the foot. The sheet, loyal to no one, lies very still to see who wins. The bolster takes no sides and, in truth, has never understood topcloth politics. A plain, practical fact. Blankets in houses like yours are often woven narrow on looms that fit into small rooms and small lives. Two widths may be seamed together to make a broader covering, and those seams, if set slightly off-center, can become the night's battleground, one side smoother, one side itchier, one side favored by habit, the other punished by reputation. Tucking and counter-tucking are the tools that turn bias into fairness, and a little practice keeps peace better than any oath. A small domestic tidbit follows the seam like a curious cat. Some thrifty beds tie narrow tapes at the blanket's foot to the bedcord, 2 or 3 gentle bows that keep the cloth from sailing entirely to the favored shore. The ties look like modest jewelry on a very serious face. They do not stop all creeping, but they make the wool reconsider before committing to a voyage. Your aunt called them courtesy strings, which is a joke and also true. Historians still argue how common such tie-downs or foot tucks were in the 14th century among Breton cottages. as opposed to later habits better documented in household manuals and painters' tidy scenes. Inventories count blankets, but do not explain how they behaved at night, and beds themselves, when found in the ground, talk only about frames and cords, not about the arrangements of cloth that visited them after dark. So the scholar is left to read seams and stitch holes, as if they were confessions. You stroke the blanket once always with the nap, never against, and it lies flatter, as if flattered. Across the small sea between you and the guest, you hear the faint whisper of wool over linen, as his hand also performs some quiet claim. Each of you has taken a little, given a little, and the bed approves of bargains. The creeping resumes, as creeping must. You decide to change tactics, warmth by companionship rather than conquest. You shift a thumb closer to the bolster, narrow the gap your jealous sheet keeps trying to widen, and borrow a breath of your guest's heat without touching him. The blanket, sensing there are now two fires of equal size, hesitates in the middle like a clerk with two superiors. You win an inch by kindness. If all else fails before morning, and sometimes it does, you have the last refuge of the foot wrap. You find the foot end with your toes, curl them beneath the tucked inch of sheet and blanket, and make yourself a little cocoon that cannot be stolen without unmaking the whole house. It looks inelegant if anyone were watching. No one is. It keeps your ankles from learning resentment. You sleep better with forgiving ankles. The dog complicates matters by adding his weight to the foot of the bed like a stone set to hold a roof that wants to lift. Bless him. The extra weight pins the blanket where it belongs for now. He sighs the long, whistling sigh of a beast who thinks he has solved something important, and perhaps he has. Your fingers, now warm again, lose their interest in cloth politics and learn to lie still. The seam you feared would camp against your ribs has chosen instead to live elsewhere, perhaps by grace, or perhaps because you steered it with the sort of blind, sleepy nudges that do more good than planning. You become the kind of warm that is almost an idea, no longer merely heat, but the certainty that heat will remain. Blankets have opinions, and so do you. The trick is to have yours earlier. You did. Now the wool lies as still as something that is planning future mischief, but currently off duty. The bed, grateful for not being asked to hold court again, breathes with you. Outside, wind worries the shutter and gets nowhere. Inside, you give the cloth's edge one last, gentle pat, the kind that says, "I know you. Behave." And the blanket, being a creature of custom, obeys long enough for sleep to throw its cloak over all three of you. You, the guest, and the stubborn strip of woven sheep that thinks itself the night's true lord. Elbows have a politics more ancient than law. Yours votes for space. His votes for warmth. The blanket campaigns for both and wins neither. You arrange your arms with diplomacy, one tucked, one folded, fingers angled so knuckles won't nudge a stranger's ribs, and discover how much territory a single forearm can claim when it travels by night. Knees, meanwhile, conduct their border raids with a confidence born of joints. A bump, a retreat, a bump again, as if testing fortifications. You answer with quiet geometry, shin parallel to mattress edge. Knee bent just so, and the mattress, creaking in its rope voice, records the treaty in a language only tired wood can read. The bolster, elected to keep order, remembers it has wheels. It rolls an inch toward you, stops, thinks, and rolls another inch toward him. The cord you tied acts like a conscience for a while, then decides sleep is a higher virtue than duty. You lift the bolster's hem and wedge a fold of sheet beneath to give it a new spine. For a few breaths, it behaves, then shuffles toward exile again, draggling its office behind it. You do not scold. You adjust. This is the art of shared sleep. Not victory, not surrender, but an endless series of small, courteous edits. When a stray knee discovers your calf like a pilgrim finding a shrine, you grant it one heartbeat's welcome, then slow push it home with a pressure as neutral as weather. When your elbow forgets charity and hunts a better angle, you escort it inward, not as punishment, but as housekeeping. Your guest mirrors the same choreography on his side, and between you, the sheep becomes a practiced river, carrying small boats of bone back to their harbors without capsizing. A plain body and bed fact keeps its hat on in the corner. Rope, latticed bedsteads, cords woven side to side and head to foot, tightened with a simple bed key, are common supports beneath straw-filled ticks in houses like this, forgiving enough to cradle bone, springy enough to answer elbows with give rather than splinter. The saying about tightening ropes before sleep is older than your back and nearly as wise. A softer bed does not promise better manners. It merely promises different negotiations. A small, homely tidbit peeks out from the bolster's case. Now and then you slip a thin hazel twig peeled smooth and blessed only by your patience between bolster and sheet, crosswise, to remind the roll to rest. Whether wood instructs wool is doubtful. What is certain is that the twig, being a little rough, helps the linen grip the linen, and the bolster slows its escape, as if a hand had laid a finger on its sleeve and said, "Hush." Historians still argue whether the rope lattice and tick underneath most rural Breton sleepers were more often set in low, box-like frames, or on taller, four-legged structures with testers and curtains at this date, and whether those curtains, when present, served chiefly to keep out drafts, to mark status, or to corral elbows that traveled as eagerly then as now. Surviving frames point in all directions. Written records like to count beds without describing their ankles. Pictures are fond of curtains because pictures enjoy drama. You breathe, and in that breath, remember the trick of sidelong stacking. Shoulder slightly forward, hips slightly back, knees not locked but nested, hands parked palm down as if smoothing invisible dough. The position grants your ribs room to lift without bumping a neighbor's air, and gives your spine a long, kind line. When the bolster deserts again, you let your head follow, half an inch, then gather it back with a sleepy nudge. The bed tolerates these corrections. It has hosted worse quarrels than two considerate sets of bones. Elbows audition for pillows when pillows fail them. Yours tries your palm, rejects it, tries the mattress, accepts it. His experiments end with the blanket making a soft saddle over his forearm. You wonder, as you often do at this hour, how many hundreds of guests this bed has taught the same lesson, that the human frame is a herd animal and learns to stand quietly when the pen is snug. The dog, unimpressed by bolster politics, locates the warmest isthmus at the foot and lands with a thump that pins the blanket like a rock in a river. Good. The wool stops its slow emigration for now, and kneecaps, deprived of moving sea, calm into islands. You give the mattress a thankful pat, 2 fingers on ticking, a tap that says, "Hold," and it answers with a sigh of straw resettling, 1,000 dry grass blades deciding, together, to be plain instead of hill. Your mind threatens, briefly, to write a speech about fairness between elbows. You refuse the podium. Instead, you count the small compliances you have received. A shoulder's angle, a knee's retreat, a bolster that at least knows its job even if it keeps applying for leave. The list grows longer than your grievances, and with it patience returns, wearing sensible shoes. Somewhere in the dark, the rope lattice whispers again, as if a sailor were walking a deck below you. You imagine knots you will tighten on a dry afternoon, and feel, right now, grateful for knots that are good enough. You slide your elbow finally into that sweet pocket between rib and mattress, where neither pride nor bone protests. Your knee tucks into its own hollow. Your heel rests on the sheet's cool grammar. Between you and the guest stretches a narrow country governed by courtesy and wool. The bolster, caught between 2 civil states, stops rolling and pretends it wanted that all along. You close your eyes and let the bed keep its minutes. The meeting is adjourned until morning. Breath settles into a shared weather, and the room learns your 2 climates. Yours tastes of smoke-flecked bread and a late apple. His carries cider's sour-sweet ghost, and the sturdy muddle of road dust and onions. None of it is unkind. The air above the bolster becomes a mingled field, a harvest of other people's suppers, turned into the simplest prayer the body knows. You practice the art of breathing beside another without borrowing too much. In through the nose, slow, as if warming a cup with your hands. Out through parted lips that hardly move, as if telling a secret you want the dark to keep. You angle your face a finger's width toward the wall, and let your breath flow along the linen fold so it doesn't stir his. He angles toward the room, sending his draft into the winter hollow above the bed. The 2 streams pass each other like cousins who nod on market day and don't need to talk. When his exhale grows whiny, you remember the orchard, the time of year when apples fall faster than pockets, and the old way the village learned to bottle a season into a drink. Warmth grows at your sternum as if the memory itself were a coal. A plain, unornamented fact. Along these coasts and inland parishes, weak ale and small cider serve as daily drinks for many households, the safer wet than some well waters and streams, a comfort to digestion when taken in humble portions, an evening softening that costs fewer coins than wine. Garlic, leeks, and onions travel from garden to pot and then into breath with a vigor unmatched by gentler greens. Beds gather the proofs of supper like careful scribes. A small practical tidbit arrives from old mouths. A leaf of parsley chewed at dusk or a nib of anise kept in the chest is said to make company pleasanter. The green taming onion's sermon and the seed coaxing sourness into civility. Less politely, some swear by a quick rinse with cider and water before bed not to clean teeth as a physician would advise, but to turn breath into something closer to bread. Whether these habits work or only reassure hosts, the motions themselves feel like housekeeping for the face. Historians still argue how widely apple orchards had spread, as deliberate plantings across 14th century Brittany's patchwork of fields, and how much of the region's drink was truly cider versus ale. In villages like yours, manor accounts mention presses and tithes of fruit. Moralists complain about excess in no precise terms. Travelers describe what they were served, and no ledger of where it came from. The land remembers best, in old root rows and gnarled survivors, and even those witnesses are tight-lipped in the dark. You continue the breath craft. A slow 4 heartbeats in, a soft 6 out, the extra length turning your mind's clamor into a long, mild thread. When his breath stumbles, perhaps a crumb's memory troubling the throat, you pause without pausing, letting your rhythm hold steady until his finds you again. 2 bellows, 1 forge. The room warms a little under this shared labor. Not much, just enough to take the bite from air that pokes at wrists and ears. Supper returns in other ways. A hint of smoke lingers from the hearth. You recognize the wood by scent oak tonight, not gorse. The dog's fur adds a cereal note, the friendly musk of a creature that naps with its nose in its tail. Your own skin carries lye and linen, and the faint metal taste that iron leaves on hands after moving a hinge. The sum of these makes a perfume no apothecary would bottle, and every sleeper in your parish would call home. You allow a private smile at the thought of how different beds smell in towns. Wax and lavender when someone is trying to impress, tallow and ink when someone is only themselves. You've slept once in a room that smelled of salt fish hung in the rafters' hospitality without apology, and learned that snoring over fish is no worse than snoring over onions. The body keeps its counsel and forgives much, so long as lungs are given something warm enough and dry enough to work with. If a draft tugs your breath away, you borrow back a thin warmth by laying your forearm over your breastbone for a few breaths, the weight making a little tent of heat you can breathe under. If he turns and sends a gust of cider toward your nose, you merely shift the width of a fingernail. Sleeping beside a person asks less for disgust than for small adjustments, and small adjustments are the heart of peace. When thoughts threaten to inventory every flavor in the air, you downgrade them to counting the small pauses between inhalation and exhalation, the sweet blank places where breath rests its tools. Those blanks grow longer by a crumb, then another. Your tongue grows lazy. Your jaw slackens without drooling. You become a bellows that remembers how to work by itself, as you once saw a mill sail turn in a night breeze, long after the miller went to bed. His breath, too, has become simple. Garlic and cider transform into the plainest thing. Air kept moving until morning. At some unremarkable hour, your bladder petitions like a polite clerk who cannot be ignored. You lie still for 3 long breaths, hoping bureaucracy will misplace the paper. It does not. You become a strategist. The room is a museum of creaks. The floor can be persuaded if you step where nails are shy. You gather yourself carefully out of warmth, lifting blanket and sheet with the slow precision of a person removing a letter from under a sleeping cat. The guest's breath holds steady. The dog opens one bright eye, decides you are not a thief, and closes the world again. Your feet find the known islands, the knotless board beside the bed, the low plank near the stool, the warm flagstone by the hearth. You move on your own breath, a tide that makes no waves. The pot waits in its usual corner clay, thick-lipped, humble, a servant who hears every secret and repeats none. You tip its mouth toward shadow, not because it cares, but because you do. A folded cloth lies beneath to hush the set-down and spare the floor. You thank your past self for that foresight with a nod you cannot see. A plain, unembarrassed fact. Chamber pots are the night's necessary tool in houses like yours, clay or wood or metal. When fortune's smiles kept near and discreet, emptied with the morning's other tasks at the midden, or the further hedge where custom and wind agree. To cross a yard by moon and frost for a ditch would be bravery wasted and sleep stolen. The pot keeps bodies within walls and arguments with weather to a minimum. A small, sensible tidbit learned from elder hands. A scatter of clean ash, shaken into the pot before sleep tames sounds and scents alike, laying a soft blanket over what must be done, and keeping spills from becoming a memory the floor will hold against you. Some add a torn twist of straw for the same reason. Others set a rosemary sprig by the handle to give the pot the manners of a garden. You keep to ash its quiet, its thrift, its honesty. Historians still argue how often rural households in 14th century Brittany relied on indoor guardrobes or outside privies versus simple pots and the morning walk to a common heap, and whether barn doors or byres shared such duties with people on the coldest nights. Documents prefer the respectable architectures of lords. The archaeological earth, when generous, offers pits and phosphates, but rarely tells who used them and when. In cottages like yours, practicality tends to leave fewer boasts. You crouch with the shy ease of someone who has lived inside a body long enough to grant its requests, without turning them into drama. The pot's rim is cool against skin. The ash makes its gentle whisper. The relief that follows is a kind of warm apology to your own bones for keeping them waiting. You finish with a patience that leaves no future accident to scold you. The cloth beneath earns its keep again as you settle the pot back to its corner with the sound of a secret closing a door. Hands learn their tidy tasks even at this hour. You dip 2 fingers in the little basin, the water now a hush colder than your courage, and touch clean to places that prefer it. You wipe on the hem of the cloth kept for this alone and hang it back on its peg to become a board by dawn. The hearth, sensing motion, thinks of brightening. You deny it with a look, and it returns to its red, wise breathing. You listen for the guest's rhythm. It is not faltered. The dog's tail sweeps once against the floor like a broom remembering work. You reverse your path, toe to heel, stepping on the house's quiet syllables in the right order. The bed greets you with the small, shocked cold that any left-behind place learns. You slide under sheet and blanket, as if returning to a letter you did not finish. The wool takes you back with some ceremony, then with forgiveness. You keep your knees close together, wisdom learned by anyone who has misjudged a returning chill, and lay the weight of your hand on your belly until warmth rights itself. If the mattress has borrowed your hollow and forgotten to leave it, you nudge straw toward the gap with a sleepy wiggle that would embarrass the daylight version of you. Night forgives such elegance. The bolster, hearing you, offers a more generous slope. Your breath, which held a little high for the journey, drops back to its old place as a bird finds the nest again in a hedge that looks like all the other hedges and is not. You think to say a small blessing on pots and ash and quiet boards, tools of mercy that keep houses from harshness, and then decide blessings are not required. Gratitude expressed by careful hands is blessing enough. The clerk inside you stamps the petition completed, files it under nights uneventful, and goes off duty. You roll a finger's width toward the warmer province of the bed, and let sleep sign the ledger again where you left off, with the same tame handwriting and the same unremarkable content, which is exactly what you hoped for. The sound comes thin as thread through shutter and thatch, not a command, but a reminder. The parish bell lifting itself out of the dark to say a small piece of time aloud. You do not open your eyes for it. You let the note pass over your face like a cool cloth, and then fade along the rafters, leaving a little silver behind in the air. The guest's breath pauses, listens the way breath can listen, and then resumes its slow cart track. The dog's ear twitches once, a soft flag answering an invisible signal. You count, not numbers, but spaces how long between toll and toll, and decide the bell has chosen a patient pace tonight, a pace that belongs to monks, or to a sexton who would rather be under wool. Another note follows, then another, each with a slightly different edge as if the night tastes them before letting them go. The bell is modest, parish-sized, neither lordly nor shy, hung in a wooden frame you have seen by day, a little crooked and surrounded by jackdaws, who believe every belfry is their parliament. At this hour the birds are sensible, only iron speaks. The sound sifts into your house as though through a sieve, losing the brass shine and keeping the bone of it. You feel it in your teeth first, then in your chest, then nowhere, and that is the right order for sleep. A plain, reliable fact. Bells keep time in your world as faithfully as the sun does, and on nights like this a parish or priory will ring for the night office matins or nocturnes in the old order, or for a remembered hour near dawn, and villages attend with ears, if not with feet. Earlier, evening's curfew bells sent people to bank their hearths, the couvre-feu so roofs would not learn mischief after wine. In the morning, Prime will say its bright name and loosen hands from blankets. Between those, a sleeper measures the distance from one rung on the ladder of hours to the next by sound alone. You float on the bell's aftertaste and review, idly, every errand the ring can be asked to run. Weather warning sent across low fields, a call for help when fire forgets its manners, a slow toll for a soul departing, a gabbling joy after a wedding that makes the whole village walk straighter for half a day. Tonight's voice is none of these. Tonight's is the thin, dutiful thread the church pulls through the cloth of night, so the cloth won't fray. You are content to be stitched. A small, sideways tidbit comes with the remembered taste of rain. When fog lies heavy, folks say bells carry low, and some old men swear the sound bends and puddles by the hedges the way water does, so travelers in fog walk toward a bell and never find the tower, only thicker sound. Others say bells have their own weather. If the clapper sticks on the first strike, expect drizzle before dawn. If the third strike rings clearer than the first two, bring a cloak to market. You do not swear by this, but you have packed a cloak for less reason. Historians still argue whether 14th century Breton parishes rang formal nocturnes as commonly as later customs suggest, especially outside towns and monasteries, whether the midnight office was a habit sustained by a few pious bellkeepers or a rare luxury of larger houses, and how widely the couvre-feu was observed away from ducal centers. Ordinances survive on parchment. The countryside, being largely obedient to fields and weather, leaves more rhythms than records. Scholars lean on fragments. The night answers with bells or with silence according to who has the strength to pull the rope. You try a lazy game. Picture the rope's rough twist in the sacristan's hands, the little hop in his heels as he puts weight into the pull, the pause while the bell swings through its arc like a great spoon stirring the dark. You picture the tongue of iron kissing bronze, the first kiss a touch too hard, the second finding manners, the rest resigned to duty. You picture the belfry settling back to quiet, wood sighing the way wood sighs when a burden is briefly shared. You prefer imagining his work to remembering your own. Both are honest, and one is safer to do lying down. The bell goes on, counting something on your behalf. You are not certain whether these strokes belong to a monastery on the far ridge or to your own parish's small pride. Sound travels strangely at night, and a lane that feels long by foot shrinks to a breath for a bell. You think of the tower's ladder, of hands cold on rungs, of the stone that sweats in November and holds the scent of pigeon, lime, and an old psalter that nobody reads with their tongue anymore. The thought is too specific for sleep. You let it go and keep only the shape of sound. If the wind changes, so does the bell. A gust from the sea rounds the note so it tastes like salt. Land breeze thins it until it could pass through a needle's eye. Rain, when it arrives without malice, makes the sound soft as cloth. Frost makes it bright and a little arrogant. Tonight the note is simple, as if the weather has stepped aside to hear itself named. You register in a very shallow drawer inside your head. That day is coming, but not yet obliged to arrive. Between rings, your house remembers to creak once, then not again. The guest, who lives in a different calendar, turns on the bolster just enough to tune his breath to a gentler key, and then forgets that he turned. The dog dreams of a hare that chooses courtesy and stops. The sheet holds its cool promise. The blanket keeps your claim without a quarrel. The bell works on, a distant neighbor carrying water past your door and not spilling any. You doze at the edge of the sound, knowing that if it ceased entirely, you would miss it the way you miss a word at the end of a sentence. When the final toll in this small series arrives, you do not mark it as last. You simply notice that the world has remembered to be a little lighter. You give the bell the same thanks you give a stranger who holds a gate for you, no speech, only the decision to walk through calmly. Your eyes stay closed. Your mouth relaxes. Your body takes the bell's hint and rings. Very softly, the older, lower note of sleep. A light thud on the mattress announces a small moon has risen. A child, cool as river stones, slides between sheet and blanket with the confidence of a messenger who knows the doorword. You do not start. You make room as the bed makes room for you, with slow hands and no questions. Little feet, sharp and honest, find the warm valley your knees made and settle there like chicks under a hen. A breath smaller than yours begins to pattern itself against your ribs. The guest does not speak. He shifts an inch to spare the child the cliff edge and returns to his quiet forge work of sleeping. You remember how many nights in your life began like this. A storm, a cough, a bad dream, a thin whimper in the doorway. And then the slow tide of family drawing itself into one, as if the bed were a boat and children the ballast that keeps it from tipping into worry. You spare a corner of the blanket for small shoulders. A hand with the gravity of a sparrow alights on your forearm and stays without asking permission. Your breath adapts, softer at the top, so the little lungs can borrow your rhythm without noticing. A plain daylight fact. In households of your time and place, children commonly sleep with kin mothers, siblings, whoever is nearest the warmth and the lullaby, especially in seasons of cold or when beds are fewer than bodies. The bed is a bench by day and a cradle by night. Space is not privacy but comfort, and comfort shared is thrift turned tender. Separate sleeping is a luxury of rooms and coin. Together, sleeping is the ordinary law of houses like yours. A small, half-smiling tidbit. Some homes touch a wet finger to a child's brow at first curl into the night, to wash away the road of dreams, and tuck a sliver of blessed salt in the hem no bigger than a seed, so the tongue of nightmare will forget the child's name. Others whisper the names of the house's beams 1, 2, 3, as if calling witnesses to the good behavior of sleep. If belief is a blanket, it covers both the waking and the dozing. Historians still argue whether 14th-century Breton families kept infants at the breast through more than one winter as a rule, and how soon older children typically moved to shared pallets with siblings versus staying in the parental bed. Parish court cases scold neglect after tragedies. Wills name cradles and beds, without telling who warmed them when. Paintings favor holy families in tidy nursery scenes from other places in later years. Evidence tugs in two directions. Practice likely varied by hearth and harvest. The child murmurs something that belongs entirely to the night 3 nonsense syllables, and a sigh in the bed, pleased, grows quieter. You slip a hand to the small back, feeling the quick drum of a heart that has not yet learned patience. Your palm becomes a roof. The guest, perhaps a father himself, turns slowly the way a careful man turns a loaf in the oven without jarring, without hurry. He leaves his side of the bolster as a mountain the child will never need to cross. When the little feet begin their slow warm dance, you adjust the blanket with 2 fingers and accept every punt and nudge as proof that blood is not tired of living. A curl of hair finds your chin and stays. The room smells briefly of hay and milk in memory only. There is no milk here, only a house that remembers it. The dog, who understands seniority and innocence, puts his chin on the bed frame and takes guard for both large and small sleepers with equal seriousness. You do not wish for more space. You wish for exactly this weight, which is small, and this trust, which is enormous. Outside, the lane keeps its own counsel. Inside, the bed, which has held so many negotiations tonight, agrees to one more. 3 breaths braided together, one blanket deciding to be larger than it looks, a child who sought warmth finding governance instead, a steady pace to copy. You keep that pace until the small moon sleeps like a stone in a pocket, and then you sleep like the pocket. The dog decides, as dogs do, that equity begins at the foot of the bed. A heavier warmth arrives across your ankles like an extra page in a book, unexpected, pleasant, a little bossy. 4 paws fold into themselves. The tail arranges. A sigh unbuttons into the wool as if the blanket were a meadow and he a farmer with rights. You do not move your feet. You tuck them beside him, and in that tucked place you gain a steady stove no pot ever matched. He brings the smells of the honest world, straw and smoke, a ghost of the yard, old bread, damp stone where he pressed his nose. Your guest, recognizing this familiar citizen, shifts his toes a thumb's width to grant joint tenancy. The dog, satisfied, melts into that miraculous shape. Only dogs know the one that is larger than a loaf and smaller than a rug, and somehow holds an entire furnace. A plain fact that needs no flourish. In cottages like yours, dogs sleep close under benches, by hearths, and often at bed's end because warmth is a shared trade, because watchkeepers deserve soft duty after dark, and because doors are better guarded by noses than by latches alone. A dog is part blanket, part bell, part parliament that passes all motions with a single thump, a small, fond tidbit. Some households save a pinch of the first loaf's crumb for the dog's pillow, rubbing it into his neck, fur so he will remember to guard bread from strangers and forget to steal it at night. Others tie a red thread to the collar on feast eves, so envy will pass him by. Whether superstition or excuse to pet, both acts make a ceremony of affection that dogs do not require, but gladly accept. Historians still argue how often dogs were allowed fully onto sleeping furniture in rural Brittany of your century, as opposed to curling on rushes near the hearth, and whether moralists' occasional scolds against beasts in beds reflect reality or only pulpit ideals. Archaeology yields bones and collars, not seating charts. Texts reveal more about preachers than about paws. The living arrangement, like most house customs, likely varied by lintel and by season. With the dog anchoring the foot, the blanket's old habit of marching off to the warmer body loses its campaign. Wool, feeling the new general behaves. Your ankles, relieved, stop their shiver. You can feel the subtle piston of the dog's breathing faster than yours, sure as a bellows, keeping your feet in a climate 1 degree kinder than the room. The child, at your knee, relaxes an inch more, as if the dog's presence drew a boundary around all of you, and posted a sign, house. Ah! The guest releases a breath that sounds like gratitude from a man who has shared worse beds with worse company. He rubs his toes together once, a little fire-making of his own, and lets them rest on the dog's shoulder with the diplomacy of a person greeting a bailiff. Respectful, not too familiar. The dog accepts jurisdiction. A soft snore, the most innocent trumpet in the parish, springs from his nose and fades, making both human sleepers smile in the dark, where no one will accuse them of it. The bed now has 3 heats, yours, the guest's, and the dog's coal at the foot. They arrange themselves like coals in a bread oven, each warming the other to a steadier glow. If a draft tries the shutter again, it finds less work to do. The island of warmth has grown larger than its map. Your toes, brave again, stretch an inch and meet fur. Your calves loosen as if unknotted by a friendly hand. You sleep easier knowing a nose presides at the threshold of dreams. Should a mouse plot an empire or a shoe offend with sudden motion, judgment will be swift and quiet. For now, judgment is merely warmth, and warmth is merely agreement. That you, the guest, the child, and the dog belong in this exact arrangement until bells or birds say otherwise. You close your eyes and let the keeper of ankles keep his post. Sleep does its soft carpentry on the room, sandpaper over splinters, a plane across the mind's rough edge. Words escape you in slow leaks, half-formed and already forgetting themselves, names of hills, a number that felt important, the end of a song you never learned. The guest answers with his own drifting syllables, a grammar of sighs, and the child punctuates with the little squeaks that come from dreams about running without moving. None of you are speaking to each other. All of you are keeping one another company. Your tongue, which has supervised markets and prayers all day, takes a holiday inside your mouth. Thoughts, tired of being nouns, become weather. You lie on your side of the bolster and let those small word clouds move through without rain. Now and then, a saint's name walks by, limping amiably, and you nod to it. Now and then, the price of salt tries to enter, You refuse the toll and the thought wanders off, mumbling to trouble some other dreamer, a plain, ordinary fact that likes to stand behind a curtain. Most households in your world say a small prayer aloud or silently before sleep. Pater, Ave, a local hymn, a whispered plea to a family saint, and then let mutterings under the breath be filed by heaven under not for judgment. The house itself has its little liturgy: bar, pin, ash, shoes. After that, half speech belongs to the straw and the rafters. A small, odd tidbit. Some folk, especially those who dread the night ride of bad dreams, place a knife under the bed, with the edge turned out to cut the road of the mare, or lay a broom across the threshold so any wandering spirit must count its straws until boredom wins. Others tuck a scrap of psalm into the bolster case. Whether the tricks make a hedge around the mind or merely around the mattress, many houses sleep easier for the charm. Historians still argue how much of such charm lore truly belongs to your century here versus arriving later in the telling, and how far clerical disapproval shaped what people admitted doing. Sermons warn against superstitions. Confessions list temptations without floor plans. Courts notice only when charms become quarrels. What people actually placed beneath bolsters and behind doors is mostly a matter between them and their pillows. Breath becomes the only language that matters. You fall into a cadence that requires no verbs. In, out, pause that is not a word. In, again. The guest keeps his own measures, overlap and harmony without effort. The child's little metronome ticks higher, then lower, then settles at last into steady. The dog whistles in a reed or two and stops. The house, fully convinced, retires from comment. Now and then, a phrase bubbles up from a dream you do not get to remember. Turn the key. The oat fields mind the step. You store none of them. Your mind has become a lazy clerk who puts every paper in the same drawer and loses the drawer under a blanket. This is the way of it on nights when nothing breaks or burns. Human voices unspool to threads too fine to tie knots, and morning gathers them back without finding tangles. If you turn, you do it in slow grammar. Shoulder, ribs, hips, knees feed a sentence with merciful punctuation. The bolster tolerates fresh prose. The sheet, agreeable, slides without scolding. You drift toward the ditch, where dreams like to fish, and back again to the bank where breath keeps a fire going. Between water and bank lies the exact place where half-words live. And you, who have nothing urgent to say, live there gladly for a while. Rain begins without rhetoric. A thin iron song on thatch tap. Pause. Tap tap like needles testing cloth. It finds its rhythm along the roof's old slopes, gathers at the eaves, and lets go in trickles that remember every path they have ever taken. The sound is close but kind. It does not hammer. It thinks. You feel the roof above you accept new work with an elder's patience. The smell comes next. Wet straw lifted into sweetness, smoke rinsed, the lane turning to bread dough beneath the wheels of morning. You keep still, so your ears can do their measuring. The drops find the thatch's stitched ridges, bundles of rye straw laid in courses, pegged and tucked and drum. A lesson you learned as a child under any roof that could be trusted. Thatch drinks first and then sheds, drinks again and sheds again, turning storm into a broken conversation that lasts until wind grows bored. Somewhere a drip makes too quick a ladder down a spar. You count between taps, ready to remember the place at dawn and slide a sparrow's worth of straw back into the seam. A plain, rain season fact. Cottages in your country and century wear thatch rye, wheat straw, heather where fields and moors decide thick enough to keep weather from teaching your bones too sharp a lesson. Thatch is light on walls, warm in winter, cool in summer, and honest about its upkeep. It wants a ridge remade, a patch where birds have argued, a pin-driven home where wind tried and failed to be clever. Tile lives in towns and on the better manners. Your roof is bread-colored and brave. A small, practical tidbit the old men in caps swear by. Lay a line of small stones or a rope along the windward eaves before a gale, to give the roof a memory of staying. Others keep a brush of broom by the ladder to flick moss from the shaded side when the sun returns. Moss drinks more than its share, and roofs prefer sobriety. A handful of folk push a pinch of ash into new thatch as it goes on. For fire to remember, it is already eaten here. Whether fire can be fooled is not a thing you will test tonight. Historians still argue which straws dominated Breton thatch in the 14th century rye, as the older books claim, or wheat and mixed stubbles as fields changed, and how often gorse or heather reinforced ridges near the coasts. Excavations give thatchy ghosts and char. Illuminations give tidy roofs, owed more to the painter's habits than to farmers' ladders. And accounts mention repairs without naming plants. The arguments blow like weather. The beds beneath sleep regardless if the roof keeps its oath. Rain moderates sound differently than wind. With wind, you hunch your shoulder in the mind and wait for scolds. With rain, you widen your ear and wait for stories. Tonight's story is about patience. Single drops turning to rivulets, a quiet overflow at the barrel, the lane's stones making brown lace. You place the drip's map into tomorrow's head and then let it go. Morning is a different person, better at ladders. Within woolen sheet, your climate improves. The dog, expert in meteorology, presses harder on the blanket foot and makes a little tent above your toes. The child occasionally sighs at the change in pressure and immediately forgets rain exists. The guest, who may have walked through a day of this earlier, breathes as if he has finally persuaded the sky to keep its temper elsewhere for a while. Your lungs, grateful for rinsed air, lower their shoulders. The drop you feared becomes regular and therefore harmless. The thatch's iron song softens to tin, then to threadbare cloth, then to silence with a memory inside it. You decide to sleep in the knowledge that 1,000 narrow stalks above your head have agreed, for one more night, to be a single roof and not a field. That is all a bed asks of weather, and weather, pleased to be thanked, rolls farther down the lane. Light does not arrive. It leaks, a gray thinness seeping through shutter cracks and the keyhole's tiny throat. The bell's last memory has faded. Now birds think of trying a note and then postpone it. The air cools you where blanket forgot, and the bed that felt like a harbor at midnight feels like a pond's bank at dawn beautiful, damp with the idea of leaving. You hold the wool higher for a few breaths, your own small dawn resistance, and then accept the chill as a tax the morning collects for services rendered. Your neck writes its opinion on your bones. A small stiffness where the bolster failed its office. A shrug answers it, kind and slow, no heroics. You open one eye toward the shutter. The slit of day is the color of pewter and farm smoke. The guest remains asleep but lighter, his breath learning day's shorter sentences. The child heat in a ball has rotated 90 degrees and now claims exactly no etiquette and all your affection. The dog anticipates duty by wagging once against the bed frame without rising. A low drum that says, "The world is still the world." A plain, cold palm fact. Dawn in houses like yours often begins before bells bother, especially in winter coals teased back to life. Doors cracked to test the weather. Animals greeted before bread because daylight is coin and must be spent honestly. Beds let go slow or quick depending on the sky. People learn to carry their warmth with them like a second shirt until the hearth remembers your face. A small, old tidbit. Some will cross themselves at first cockcrow to nail dreams to the beam and sip a finger of last night's small ale or watered cider an eye-opener, gentler than river water in frost. A few keep a wool cap by the bolster and pull it over ears before rising, claiming the head must not be the day's coldest tool. You do not scorn these measures. You permit yourself the cap on wicked mornings and pretend you always meant to be so fashionable. Historians still argue whether cockcrow truly divided labor in rural Brittany, as neatly as monastic hours suggest first crow for the fire, second for beasts, third for bread, or whether families kept a looser pact with light that varied by month and trade. Records of rents and markets name days, not dawns. Saints' lives paint pieties, pious in ink. The living ran on weather, hunger, and habit, which leave fewer tidy ledgers. You let the first proper yawn open you like a hinge newly oiled. The bed accepts your small betrayals, an arm lifted, a knee drawn up, the blanket folded to spare an elbow from the draft. You count the tasks ahead, and then forget the count. Counting is a daytime sport. For now, you promise yourself the cheap luxury of one more minute, pressed to the bolster's kinder end, and the minute keeps its bargain by feeling 10 times its size. The child wakes without deciding to and burrows like a mole to avoid knowledge. You lend a corner of the blanket to help the fiction. The dog commits to standing, shakes the entire night out of his coat in a single thrum, and sneezes in the precise direction of the door. The guest opens his eyes to the color of pewter, and without turning his head, arranges a smile that is more about manners than joy, which is perfectly adequate at this hour. You slide your feet from their tent and test the air with the bravery of toes. It is not cruel, only honest. You will leave the bed. The bed will forgive you. By evening, you will ask it to forgive you again. This is the oldest friendship you know. You tuck the blanket over the child's shoulders and run your palm once along the dog's back to pay his night's wages. Then you pull breath into your chest and decide gently to belong to the day. The first stand is a negotiation between spine and intention. You sit and let blood find its road. The rope lattice answers with a creak that is not complaint, but minutes being written down. Your neck registers the bolster's late-night vacation with a tight line. You counter with slow circles no bigger than a coin, then a stretch that thinks it might be elegant. Your back confesses it carried more than it was paid for. You forgive it with a palm pressed flat to the small of it, and a breath that travels to meet your hand. Your guest rises as if convincing a stubborn mule kind words. A pause, a second try, and then smiles the universal morning treaty. We are not enemies. We are not friends. We will be decent. The child's hair has invented new laws of physics. The dog yawns a cavern into which all of last night could fall and be tidied away. A plain workshop fact. Tight ropes under a tick make better mornings. Beds in your world live on attention. Their lattices twisted taut with a simple wooden key. The turn gives back an inch of kindness to shoulders and hips, and that inch becomes an hour's worth of less complaint. Beating ticks, turning them, coaxing straw from valley to plain. All of it is the slow craft of future backs. A small, brisk tidbit. Some folk clap their hands 3 times above their heads before stepping on the floor, to wake luck without waking ache, then touch a beam with the backs of their fingers so the day will bend and not snap. Others swing each leg out in turn to tap heel on plank, left for work, right for grace, both for breakfast. The rituals look foolish in public and work just as well in private. Historians still argue the everyday prevalence of rope beds versus simple board frames or floor pallets among 14th-century Breton cottagers, and whether tightening was weekly business or a chore for feast-eves, when cousins came and floors needed to sound less like ships. Inventories count one bed, as if saying one sky, and leave scholars to squint at holes in posts and the ghost marks of cord. You stand finally, and the world does not disagree. The cold on the floor is thin and brief. Your souls learn it and forget. You stretch both arms up until fingers touch the smoke-polished beam, then down to your toes, then sideways like a weather vane testing wind. Your back answers with a little chorus of small bones make small sounds. None of them matter. They have voted to carry you. The bed shows the map of where you lay 2 long ovals, a child's circle, the dog's paw print at the foot. You smooth the sheet with one sweep, the way you might pet a horse's flank to tell it you are finished for now. Your guest rolls his shoulders in time with your hands, a silent lesson traveling across the wool. You trade glances that say, the night had elbows, but it did not win. You pull the chemise straight, tie hose with a knot that will forgive clumsy fingers later, and feel the house pull you forward toward bread and heat. Your back has already forgotten its protest and begun thinking about buckets. You promise it a stool for a minute at noon, which you may not deliver, but promises, like stretches, do some good even when they are thin. The bed keeps your shape a moment longer, then erases you. You leave the room like a person stepping out of a page, and the page smooths behind you. Morning asks for small courtesies. You answer with bread, salt, and a cup. The crust, last night's weights under cloth. You cut it with the respect due to a thing that has bridged many hours. You give the child a softer slice, and the guest the heel, because some houses count the heel as honor. Your own piece is the ordinary middle, which tastes like thrift and fields. Salt shows its white cheek from the little pot. You tap out enough to teach bread to remember the sea. A cup goes round cider watered, or small ale if the cask coopered yesterday behaved and the first swallow warms the throat's hinge. You do not toast, you nod. The guest nods back and says his thanks to the room, because he knows the room did half the work of sheltering him. The child eats with the gravity of a bishop. The dog receives his due, a crumb held flat on the palm, so he will mind his teeth and your fingers. A plain table fact. Bread is the morning for most households like yours. Rye, barley, mixed loaves with wheat. If fortune's wheel had a generous spoke salted when salt can be afforded, dipped in something wet if teeth or weather require kindness. Meat waits for later. Porridge belongs to other days and pots. Drink is light and honest. Water may join it or not, depending on where the bucket walked. A small, amiable tidbit. A pinch of salt on a guest slice marks welcome in some lanes, so his words today will be seasoned, and his feet will remember the door. Others set 2 grains aside on the sill for the house's spirits, so they will keep from seasoning the porridge with mischief. Whether folk or spirits eat better for these manners is not recorded. The bread, regardless, disappears in good order. Historians still argue what breakfast meant among rural Bretons in the 14th century, whether a bite at dawn was common, or whether most work began fasting until a more serious bite at mid-morning. Custom leans on labor and season. Ink leans on taxes and sins. Travelers write of what they were offered, not of what hosts ate when alone. Likely the day's first mouthfuls varied by weather, chores, and what the jar could spare. You share the salt with the guest. He shakes a thoughtful dust and eats it all, which is polite. He wipes his mouth on the back of his hand, and then remembers the cloth, and uses it, which is kinder. The child, crumb-cheeked, offers the dog a sermon on patience. The dog practices none and receives a crumb anyway. Outside, the lane begins to articulate itself in hoof and boot. Inside, the cup's second passing is less about thirst and more about gratitude. You set aside a corner of bread for later, a pocket's insurance, and tuck it where hands will remember. The guest laces his bundle with more care than it seems to deserve, and bows his chin toward the hearth in a greeting to the house's heart. You wet your lips with the last sip and feel the day sit more squarely on its stool. You have fed the hour with bread and thanks. The hour appeased promises not to bite. Bedding returns to weather as to a friend who tells the truth. You lift the sheet and shake it once toward the doorway where clean air waits with open hands. Lint rises, regrets fall. You take the tick by its ear and tug it off the frame with a grunt that has been in your family for generations. Out to the fence it goes, clouding the morning with a golden ghost when you beat it with the willow switch reserved for this rite. Each thwack is a hymn to future sleep. Straw shifts, dust departs with a dignity it did not possess indoors. The blanket gets its sermon of smoke held briefly above the hearth, so the last of last night's company will consider other calendars. You brush it with a stiff bundle of heather and watch the nap lie down in agreeable lanes. The bolster is scolded gently, stuffing redistributed with a boxer's taps, the belt retied with a promise not to betray you tonight. The rope lattice on the frame receives its turn of the key. Cords tighten. The bed lifts its chin and says it might be young after all. A plain housekeeping fact. Bedding in houses like yours is cared for by air, sun, beating, smoke, and attention more than by water. Laundering is for what lies next to skin, not for what would drown if treated so. Ticks travel to hedges, blankets to breezes, sheets to tubs when coin and fuel permit. The cycle is a calendar of comfort. Beat on the fair day, turn after a guest, tighten when back complains, mend when mending hour can be stolen from work. A small, thrifty tidbit. Some shake a handful of crushed bracken into the tick at refilling, to teach the straw to mind fleas, and stitch a colored thread through one corner of the sheet each season, so they can remember which side met which shoulder last. Others chalk a tiny mark on the bed frame, after each tightening a secret tally of care, then rub it off at feast-tide, so the bed will not grow vain. Historians still argue how often ordinary households fully emptied and refreshed ticks in the 14th century by feast, by harvest, by need, and whether certain herbs were local custom or later embroidery on memory. Surviving ticks are shy. Records love to say bedding and not confess its guts. Paintings prefer curtains to straw. The truest evidence is what bodies ask for and hands keep doing. You clap the sheet into line with quick, chopping motions learned from grandmothers. The sound is feather-light thunder. Sun, faint but present, lays a gray coin on the sill. You spend it on linen. The guest, grateful and useful, carries one end of the tick without being asked, and does not complain when dust baptizes him a second time. The child chases motes and calls them bees. The dog supervises with his tail. which approves everything at once. When the bed is remade sheet smoothed, blanket squared, bolster dutiful, you stand back and admire a plain piece of good work. The sort that never gets a song and deserves one. The room feels taller with clean air in it. The beds of many houses are their quietest accomplishments. Yours is now a promise written in straw and tightened knots. Tonight will be better for what you just did. The promise is enough to carry you through a day of chores that will not praise you either. Combs come out like small saws for a forest that grows where it pleases. You sit the child on a stool where daylight can find nits if it must, and you begin with patience sharpened by habit. Teeth of bone or boxwood walk the scalp in close files, hair parts, and confesses yesterday. The child endures with sighs and then, bribed by soft words and a future crust of sugar, if sugar ever returns to the house, endures with less drama. Your own head will have its turn. The guest, if he is wise, will borrow the fine tooth and pretend he always meant to ask. A plain household fact. Knit combings belong to mornings, to light, to the democracy of small teeth, part of the same chore. Family is sweeping, washing, and setting dough. Lice are not scandal but season. They yield to persistence, heat, ash, and attention, and they return when given opportunity. What matters is the rhythm of care, the stubborn refusal to grant the little kingdoms a throne. A small, unglamorous tidbit. Some warm the comb in sun first to wake its temper, and dust a pinch of fine ash along the parting, so teeth slide smoother and offenders show themselves paler against dark hair. Others keep a saucer beside the stool, with a thread of vinegar in it, more ritual than cure-dipping comb tips, to remind them of sharpness. Whether vinegar helps or only smells honest, the saucer makes the work feel like craft, not siege. Historians still argue the exact designs of everyday combs among rural Bretons of your century, double-sided with coarse and fine teeth or simple single rows, and how widely vinegar, ash, oil, or heat were favored in these lanes versus others. Finds from middens bring up fragments and teeth without labels. Pictures, gift combs to saints and court women, who own better ones than yours. Plain combs work. The argument mostly keeps scholars warm. You pass the comb, section by patient section, listening for the snag that means diligence, not failure. The child winces once, twice. You lift, soothe, resume. The guest watches with the careful politeness of someone trying to decide whether to scratch his own head without indicting himself. You spare him by offering the comb before he asks. He takes it, disappears to the door's shadow, and returns looking relieved and nobly unembarrassed. Your turn next. You work by touch rather than vanity. Hair lifted, teeth set close enough to sing against each other, scalp refreshed by the honest scrape. The dog, who fears nothing but baths, relaxes. He knows combs are a human music. The little saucer's vinegar does its theatrical duty. A cloth receives whatever cannot be persuaded to good behavior, and the cloth will visit the fire later, quietly, without a sermon. When every head in the room stops fretting, the room itself stands an inch taller. You braid the child's hair to keep the day from making sport of it, knot your own scarf, and feel a tiny victory more satisfying than many large ones. You will lose ground again by nightfall. You will win it again tomorrow. The bed will be kinder for this work. So will the shoulders beneath it. The small world is tamed for now. You put the comb away like a knife after bread clean, ready, certain of future service. Boots laced, bundle tied. The guest stands by the door with that traveler's humility. A person who has borrowed heat and air, and now pays in thanks and the promise not to forget your roof. You open the bar, morning enters, damp on the breath, and the lane looks exactly like the lane you remember, and exactly like a new road. The child hides behind your knee and peeks. The dog performs the diplomacy of escort. Not too near, not too far. Eyes saying he could accompany a mile if invited, and would forgive being refused. You trade a last weather sentence. You exchange saints-like coins. The guest pats the bolster in farewell, which is either superstition or gratitude. Both are sufficient. He leaves a word for the bed, served me, and for the house, kept me, and for you, which is only your name, said properly. You answer with bread's corner for the road, and a pinch of salt folded in paper so luck will not say it was snubbed. A plain, public fact. Hospitality in these parts Is a parish's reputation carried on boots, beds shared, bowls filled, doors kept reasonably open. Inns have their work where roads thicken, but lanes lean on houses like yours to knit the countryside into more than fields. The bed is a treaty written in wool. The road is a witness who never stops talking. A small door-sill tidbit, a sprig of broom or rosemary over the lintel where guests pass, is said to keep gossip from clinging to your rafters after they go. Brush it down when the moon turns and burn it with sweepings, so words do not nest. Some scratch across with a nail where a tall man will not see it, and a short man will. A private reminder to the house that it served both stature and hunger with equal spoons. Historians still argue how thickly true inns dotted the rural Breton roads in your century, versus the later maps that make hospitality look like a trade post every mile, and whether dues and privileges narrowed the welcome strangers could expect in certain domains. The paper world and the mud world rarely match in neatness. The bed records better than the bailiff, and the bed keeps a poorer archive. He steps out. The knock you dread and expect belongs to the next pair of feet, not yet arrived, already in the world. You return the bar to its bed, turn to the room, and find it smaller in the way rooms always are after goodbyes. Then you notice the bed waiting, newly made, quiet as a pond before a thrown stone. You think, tonight perhaps, the blanket will stay truer, perhaps elbows will behave, perhaps the bolster will remember its oath. You also think, if not, we have learned the ways of peace. You sweep twice, wipe the table, set the cup upside down on its ring of dry. The child asks whether the dog may sleep on the bed tonight. You answer with a laugh that means we will see. The house breathes once, a long exhale of ash and clean straw, and settles to the day's proper business. There will be another knock someday. There will be the same bed. You will make the same treaty, because that is the work, to be the house that remembers how. You lie back in the room you have emptied of night, and filled with morning's soft grammar broom prints on the floorboards, a bed smoothed into patience, a kettle listening for its cue. Let everything cluttered step backward, the boots at the door, the bundle that left, the small feet that learned warmth, the dog's weight like a stone that protected sleep. Keep only what is quiet and useful, straw that will be plain again at dusk, ropes pulled snug, a sheet that forgives creases, a blanket that can learn loyalty for an hour at a time. See the roof above you without looking straw stitched to straw, drops tapering into hush. Let the rafters' dark sweetness drift down like the last note of a bell, then dissolve. Feel the window's seam forget the wind's name. Let the bolster widen into a shore that takes the tide and gives it back. You are a simple shape inside a larger, kinder shape. Your breath is a slow hand smoothing linen. Set your thoughts to small tasks that never finish. Counting the pins in the rope lattice. Placing 3 sticks by the hearth for morning. Folding the corner of a sheet that is already flat. Each task completes itself and leaves almost nothing behind. Air goes in, air goes out. A long pause becomes a blanket, and the house agrees to hold its end. Let the room dim by degrees until only warmth remains, the warmth of bodies that have left and will return. The warmth of a bed that has learned to be better than it was. The warmth of a house that understands the grammar of welcome without needing to speak. When a last little draft arrives, give it your shoulder and let it pass. When the bells think of morning, let them go on without you. You have already reached shore. Stay. We hope this glimpse into old customs has been a calm and pleasant one. If it made you curious for more, you can like, share, or leave a kind comment. And if you wish, subscribe to be here for the next unhurried tradition we explore together. End of script. Sweet dreams.